Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
My name is Brent Wisner, and I represent a plaintiff in this lawsuit. I understand you have been put forward as a witness to testify on behalf of Monsanto. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is your understanding of what your role is here?
My role here is to represent the company and speak on their behalf.
What exactly did you do to prepare for your deposition today?
So the main thing I did was work with my attorneys who are here and then review documents.
And how much time did you spend preparing?
With our legal counsel, it was probably in the realm of 150 to 200 hours, and then reviewing documents was probably somewhere around 250 hours.
Okay, so you spent upwards of 400 hours preparing for this deposition.
Somewhere in there. I haven't done a firm count.
So one of the things you're here to talk about, for example, is you're going to tell us Monsanto's view on whether or not Roundup causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Our knowledge and positions regarding the carcinogenicity of glyphosate-based formulations.
All right. So first thing I want to talk about, so we're going to talk about causation, okay? I'm going to write up here causation, all right?
Okay.
All right, so one of the things that the jury's going to hear before they see your testimony is they're going to hear from our experts that sort of talk about what we call the 3 pillars of causation science, okay?
Okay.
And the way we've divided that is in one pillar we have epidemiology, okay?
Okay.
And then the next pillar we have sort of animal carcinogenicity studies, okay?
Okay.
Like, does it promote tumors, essentially, is what we're looking at there.
I understand.
Yeah, that's how I'm dividing it. Just, I want you to know what I'm doing so you're not confused or whatever. So the first one's going to be epi, right? The second one is going to be, I'm going to call it tox, but animal tox, okay?
Okay.
And the third one is cell studies, okay?
Okay.
Who is Dr. Farmer?
Dr. Farmer is a scientist with our toxicology team.
Okay. And she's been working on glyphosate and Roundup for many years, right?
That's correct.
Is she a resource that you would go to talk about toxicology or the science behind Roundup?
Yes.
Okay. I'm handing you a portion of her deposition. I didn't print out the whole thing because it was really long, but it's Exhibit 4. And you can see this was taken September 26, 2018. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. And could I have a moment to review?
Yeah, sure. It's just 2 pages, so go ahead and review it.
Thank you.
Let me just ask you, do you agree with that there is no evidence at all suggesting that Roundup can cause any type of cancer?
So the company's position is that there is no evidence related to real-world exposures that would indicate glyphosate or glyphosate-based formulations cause cancer.
So that leads us to the first pillar, which we've called epidemiology, right? And
That's right.
And I'm just going to write here for all 3 of these, because this is really what you're saying. Monsanto, no evidence in real world. Is that right?
Well, I would say across the board. The animal studies show nothing.
Okay.
The epidemiology data show no relationship.
Okay. No evidence across the board. Okay, but you've never actually gone out and taken blood from a human being.
We have not done that because we have the data necessary for understanding that question in human cells, leukocytes. We also have that study from animals. And when you look at those 2 together, they are accepted around the world as being predictive of human health outcomes.
All right, so let's talk about epidemiology. I'm going to go through a couple studies with you and just kind of quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on this. We have experts for that. But I'm handing you Exhibit 5. This is a case control study, correct?
That's correct. And may I have a moment to review, please?
Sure. Okay, great. So this is a study done by 2 scientists, Dr. Hardell and Erickson, correct?
That's correct.
And it was published in 1998, correct?
That's correct.
So this is legitimately 20 years ago.
Yes, it was 20 years ago.
Okay. And the title of it is a case control study of non-Hodgkin lymphoma and exposure to pesticides. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right, and if we go into the study, and I'll specifically draw your attention to Table 1. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And in here, there's a listing for glyphosate, and that has an odds ratio of 2.3 that's not statistically significant, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And then if you go down to Table 2, there is exposure to different types of herbicides with dose response. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And it lists these herbicides, and glyphosate is not specifically listed, right?
No, it is not.
All right. But in the other category, there is a odds ratio of 3.0. You see that?
I do.
And you have, for low exposure, it's 2.0. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And for high exposure, it's 6.8. That's statistically significant. You see that?
I do see that.
All right. This is a study that came out in 1998, and Monsanto was fully aware of this study, correct?
Yes, we were aware of this study at the...
Fair enough. You would agree, though, that the study was raising the index of concern about there being a possible link between glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
In Monsanto, no, there was no, it did not raise a concern with us.
Okay. I'm handing you Exhibit 7. So this is a document. It's a review of the Hardell and Erickson study, right?
That's correct.
And it was prepared by John Aquavella and Donna Farmer of the Monsanto Company.
That's correct.
April 14th, 1999.
That's correct.
And this is a document that Monsanto created as part of its review and consideration of the epidemiological science.
That's right.
And it says, it is clear, however, that the widespread use of glyphosate and concerns about pesticide-related health effects for farmers and their families will raise the, quote, index of concern for glyphosate in future agricultural epidemiological studies. Did I read that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So according to Dr. Farmer and Dr. Aquavella, this Hardell study did raise the index of concern.
They are not saying that it raises the index of concern for the company. It's not clear here who they're saying, but the implication is that it's in future epidemiologic studies.
Okay.
So it's perhaps other researchers in the field might take more of an interest.
So this is 20 years ago, right?
That's correct.
And since Dr. Aquavella and Dr. Farmer raised this concern about the Hardell study, did Monsanto at that point investigate or explore the possibility of conducting an epidemiological study?
I'm not convinced they're saying this raises a concern for them. They're walking through giving an analysis, saying this is a small study with only a few people, weak associations, and perhaps other researchers in epidemiology may take more of an interest.
All right, so let's just be very clear. This is by John Aquavella and Donna Farmer, correct?
That's correct.
In the very last sentence, after in a paragraph that begins, in conclusion, that sentence ends, it is clear, however, the widespread use of glyphosate and concerns about pesticide-related health effects for farmers and their families will raise the, quote, index of concern for glyphosate in future agricultural epidemiological studies. That's what it says, right?
Those are the words on the page.
Okay, great. And after they said that it raises this index of concern for glyphosate in future agricultural studies, epidemiological studies, did Monsanto do their own study?
We did not do that because we did not believe this study provided the type of evidence that warranted additional concern.
Okay. Again, that goes back to where we started this discussion today, that there's no evidence across the board.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm handing you another document. This is Exhibit 8 to your deposition. So this is a document. It has the first page is an email, and there's an attachment to it, correct?
That's correct.
And 1 second. And as you can see here, the email is from John Aquavella. Do you see that?
I do see that.
To Dr. Farmer.
That's correct.
Do you ever know Dr. Aquavella?
I've met him, but not while he worked at Monsanto.
Okay, and he was an epidemiologist, right?
That's correct.
And then if you look at the bottom, there's a paragraph. It says, Hardell's most recent study comes at a time when the U.S. National Cancer Institute is getting ready to begin publishing papers from their prospective agricultural health study of 60,000 farmers and their families. Thus, the stage is set for another round of epidemiologic studies to cause significant concern for industry. Do you see that?
I do see that.
You would agree that the Hardell study caused concern for the industry?
The word here on the page is concern, but it's not really explained what the context is for that concern.
I'm handing you another study. This is Exhibit 9 to Deposition.
All right.
So this is a study also published by Hardell Erickson, and now there's a new author as well, right?
Yes, there is.
And it's titled Exposure to Pesticides as Risk Factor for Non-Hodgkin's Lymphoma and Hairy Cell Leukemia, Pooled Analysis of 2 Swedish Case Control Studies. See that?
Yes, I do.
And this is from 2002. You can see it up there at the top.
Yes, I do see that.
All right. And so this was a follow-up study by Drs. Hardell and Erickson, which looked at a larger group of people, correct?
Larger overall, but not much larger for glyphosate use.
Okay. And if you look at the results section, it's on page 1045. You there?
Yes, I am.
It reads, an increased risk was found for exposure to herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and impregnating agents, Table 1. Regarding specific agents, odds ratio was highest for glyphosate and MCPA. You see that?
I do see that.
And, I mean, I guess the first question is did Monsanto at that point conduct an epidemiological study?
No, because this study, as I described, doesn't raise a question. We have a very small number of cases and controls. There's only 16 people here. And when we look at the data in Table 7, as they adjust for other exposures, the relationship goes away.
That's sir. Why didn't Monsanto?
So when you look at this data, this study does not raise that concern for us. It does not say there's something here that we need to look into. What we're seeing is small numbers of people, very large estimates of the odds ratio. This paper really isn't, of a quality to inform that kind of a decision.
Okay.
You wouldn't take information like this and then go out and start conducting very large-scale studies.
Okay. So this wasn't enough to do anything?
This study is not sufficient to raise any concern.
All right.
Because it shows no relationship.
Well, that was 2000 was that 2002? Is that right? Right, sir?
Oh, sorry, 2002, yes, when we published it.
Well, just before that came out, there was another study called McDuffie. You familiar with that study?
Yes, sir.
All right, doctor. Thank you for having a chance. You had a chance to review Exhibits 10, 11, and 12.
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's start off with Exhibit 10. This is an email exchange from Dr. Aquavella to several Monsanto employees. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And including those employees, of course, is Dr. Farmer. Do you see that?
Sure. I see. Oh, yes. Yes, I do.
William Haydens.
I'm having a hard time finding Dr. Hayden. Oh, there we go. Yes.
Dr. Goldstein.
Yes.
And so this was a document sent by Dr. Vella as part of his employment at Monsanto, correct?
That's correct.
And he writes, the Canadian NHL glyphosate abstract we discussed last week is on the internet, so I think it is fair game to distribute, see attached. I'm planning to attend the presentation of this paper to talk to the author. I note that one of her co-authors, J.R. McLaughlin, is an epidemiologist I recently recruited to serve on American College of Epidemiology Admissions Committee, which I chair. See that?
I do see that.
He goes on, I think we might want to include him, or perhaps even the first author, after I check her out, in the scientific outreach meeting we were thinking about for Canadian scientists. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Do you know what scientific outreach meeting he's referring to?
A scientific outreach meeting. Not without additional context.
And if you turn the page, there's the attachment to it. And this is that abstract that he's referring to in his email, right?
Yes.
And you look at the very bottom of the abstract, and the title of the abstract is Non-Hodgkin's Lymphoma and the Pesticide Hypothesis Dose Response. You see that?
I do see that.
And dose response, that's the general scientific principle that the more exposure you have to something, the more likely that disease outcome occurs.
Well, if that disease outcome is associated with the exposure.
Absolutely, right.
So if this is something capable of if this substance is capable of resulting in a given disease, then the general understanding is the greater the exposure, the more likely that outcome is.
And then it says, B, for more than 2 days per year of exposure to glyphosate resulted in an odds ratio of 2.11 with a confidence interval of 1.20 to 3.72. You see that?
I do see that.
Okay. So that's what was written in the original abstract, right?
Yeah, this is the abstract for the scientific meeting.
So this is the next document. This is Exhibit 11. You see that, sir?
I do see that.
All right. And this was a memo prepared by Dr. Aquavella.
Yes.
And it's dated August 24th, 2000, right?
That's correct.
And again, this was prepared by Dr. Aquavella in his capacity while employed at Monsanto.
Yes, he was at Monsanto at this time. Yes.
All right, great. And if you look at the first blacked bullet point, he's actually talking about this specific study, the McDuffie study.
Let me just make sure that's the same author list. Yes.
It says, since the organizers of the ISEE meeting, and I'll stop right there, that's the meeting where this abstract was being presented, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Asked me to chair the pesticide session, which included this paper. I had the opportunity to spend some time with the author. She struck me as a reasonable person. I was expecting a Canadian of Scottish descent, but Dr. McDuffie is of African descent. She doesn't seem to have any preconceived notions about glyphosate. She agreed to share her paper with me when it was ready for submission for publication. She also agreed to come and present her work to an industry audience. You see that?
Yeah. I do see those words.
So it looks like Dr. Aquavella, in his capacity working at Monsanto, is interfacing with Dr. McDuffie about this publication.
Yes, he's apparently had a conversation with Dr. McDuffie at the ISEE meeting.
Okay. And he goes, it remains to be seen how glyphosate is treated in the eventual publication from this study, and whether anyone picks up selectively on the presumably confounded glyphosate finding that was included in the meeting abstract. Obviously, we need to be as prepared as we can, given limited information. I mentioned some specific follow-up plans below. Do you see that?
I do see.
Now, if we could turn to Exhibit 12, this is the actual McDuffie study that was published, correct?
Sure. Yes, this is a study from Dr. McDuffie and her team.
And as we see here, Dr. McDuffie, and you can see the abstract here that was ultimately published, right?
I do see that.
And there is no reference to the greater than 2 days use result for glyphosate, is there?
Let me just make sure.
And as we see here, Dr. McDuffie, and you can see the abstract here that was ultimately published, right?
I do see that.
And there is no reference to the greater than 2 days use result for glyphosate, is there?
Let me just make sure. There is no mention of that.
Okay. But if we turn the page and you actually dig into the article, and Doctor, just to be clear, because it's not in the abstract, that means it wouldn't be picked up on literature searches, right?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay. And here we have the frequency of exposure to selected herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and fumigants stratified by the number of days per year of exposure. You see that?
I do see that.
And of course, we have the glyphosate number. Do you see that?
Let's see. Yes, I do.
And for people who are exposed between 0 and 2 days per year, there is no elevated rate, correct?
That's correct.
But then when you look at greater than 2 days per year, we have an odds ratio of 2.12. You see that?
I do see that.
And that result, according to this, is statistically significant, correct?
Yes, it is, based on what appears to be a rather small sample size out of the entire population.
I handed you another document. This is an email exchange that's been produced in this litigation. It's Exhibit 13. This is an email exchange between Dr. Farmer, Dr. Aquavella, and other Monsanto employees. Do you see that?
I do.
Including Dr. Heidens.
Yes, I do.
Dr. Goldstein.
Yes.
And this was a document that was shared amongst Monsanto employees in the ordinary course of their business.
That's correct.
All right, if you look at the bottom email here, it's from Dr. Aquavella. He's talking about the McDuffie article. You see that?
I do see that.
And he says, the McDuffie article appeared in the November issue of the journal, Epidemiology, Biomarkers, and Prevention. See abstract below. Unlike the abstract presented at the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology meeting, August 1999, Glyphosate is no longer mentioned as a risk factor in the abstract. You see that?
I do see that.
It says I will have to get the article and see what it says in the small print, right?
I do see that.
And then if you read Donna Farmer responds to this, John, I know we don't yet know what says in the small print, but the fact that glyphosate is no longer mentioned in the abstract is a huge step forward. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Then she says it removes it from being picked up by abstract searches, exclamation mark. See that?
I do see that.
So here Dr. Farmer is celebrating that the glyphosate result will not be picked up in abstract searches, correct?
When I look at this, I don't know, celebrate is the right term for it, but what I don't understand is why the meaning of, the impact of the abstract search, because when I do literature searches, you just do a basic search, it gives you a search of the whole text. The abstract search is something you have to specifically ask for. And so a regular literature search would pick this up. And it does get picked up when an agency does a review.
All right, so this is a series of emails between Monsanto employees, correct?
Yes, it is.
Primarily Dr. Farmer, Dr. Aquavella, and Dr. Heidens, correct?
That's correct.
And the subject of the email is McDuffie paper. And if we look, the email starts off with Dr. Aquavella sort of describing his quick review of the McDuffie article, correct?
Yes, he does.
And then Bill Heidens responds, John, so if I understand the situation correctly, even though reference to glyphosate wasn't removed entirely, there was a substantial reduction in emphasis, including, but not limited to, removal from the abstract. Bill, did I read that right?
You did read that correctly.
Great, and then Dr. Aquavella responds, right, it is a good result, but not everything we wanted. The invalid result could be cited as a second glyphosate NHL finding. However, it will not be picked up by most of the usual suspects because it's not mentioned in the abstract. John, did I read that right?
You did.
Okay. So according to Dr. Aquavella, an epidemiologist at Monsanto, this McDuffie was a second NHL finding.
He says that the invalid result could be cited. So if someone wanted to argue using this invalid result, they could say, we have a second finding.
And
He's not saying it's scientifically justified.
Okay. And he says it won't be picked up by most of the usual suspects. Do you know who he's referring to?
No, I do not.
John, darn. But at least it's out of the abstract and not a huge discussion in the text. Regarding the journal it is published in, how is it viewed? Is it a premier journal or lower rung journal? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So again, it looks like Dr. Farmer and Dr. Aquavella both believe that it is a good thing that the glyphosate data was not in the abstract.
Yeah, I can't speak to why they viewed this using these words or described their view of it using these words, but I don't believe that being out of the abstract really prevents people from finding it.
So I'm handing you Exhibit 15.
All right.
And this is a memo prepared by Dr. Aquavella, Marion Bleak, Donna Farmer, Daniel Goldstein, and Christoph Gusta, correct?
That is correct.
It's dated June 11, 2012. Sorry, 2002.
2002.
So if we turn the page, there's an introduction. Do you see that?
I do see that.
All right, and then there's a section that says macro issues.
I do see that.
All right. I want to start off with the second paragraph. It says, allegations based on results from epidemiologic studies have begun to affect our freedom to operate. I'll stop right there. Do you understand what that means, freedom to operate?
So freedom to operate within the company has, I think everyone defines it differently, just depending on what role they're in and what sort of function they're part of.
Do you know what he means here when he says the results of epidemiologic studies have begun to affect our freedom to operate?
I can't speak for what Dr. Aquavella specifically meant by that, again, just because people tend to use it differently.
Okay. In Canada, enabled by a recent Supreme Court ruling, localities have cited epidemiologic findings to ban non-essential use of pesticides, usurping federal regulations that are based on toxicologic data. You see that?
I do see that.
So it appears then that the freedom to operate that Dr. Aquavella is referring to is, he's worried people are banning it.
So in Canada, localities have cited epidemiologic findings. They're And what he's pointing out here is those reviews are not based on, those reviews are, these bans are contradicting federal regulations because, and those federal regulations are based on actual toxicological data.
Sure. And he's saying that that's what's affecting Monsanto's freedom to operate.
Yeah, again, you know, without Dr. Acquivella's specific definition, it's very difficult to know precisely what he's referring to. You know, is there some bigger definition he has? Is it a narrower definition? He's got a footnote, but it doesn't define what he means.
All right, well, you know, I guess we'll just have to read the text and infer from that what we will. The next sentence says, there are now 6 published studies that arguably associate glyphosate and other pesticides with lymphopoietic cancers or adverse reproductive outcomes. You see that?
I do see that.
And lymphopoietic cancers, that's blood cancers, right, in the lymphocytes?
So I'm not here to testify for the company about the specific medical issues of, you know, what specific medical terms mean. Speaking for myself, I can tell you that is my understanding of that word.
Right. Non-Hodgkin lymphoma is a lymphopoietic cancer.
Again, I'm not here to testify for the company about those topics, but speaking for myself, I can tell you that is my understanding.
And he cites 4 through 6. You see that?
Yes, he does.
All right. Or I should say they do, because I don't actually know who the final author of this document is. But, and if we look at 4 through 6, we have a study from 1998. Do you see that?
I do see that.
It's a Hardell study.
It is.
We have the Hardell study we discussed from 1999.
Yes, that's correct.
And we have the McDuffie study that we've discussed.
I do see that.
Okay, so Dr. Acquivella is stating in this memo, sorry, I shouldn't say that. These doctors, Acquivella, Bleak, Farmer, Goldstein, and Gustin, are stating in this memo that these studies, 3 ones that we've talked about so far, arguably associate glyphosate and other pesticides with lymphopoietic cancers, correct?
The words on the page, sorry. I think you just have to go with what the actual statement on the page is to get their understanding.
And then if you turn to the next page, the paragraph continues. It talks about numerous other studies are ongoing in the U.S., Canada, and Europe. Do you see that?
I do see that.
It says, experience has shown that these studies will associate widely used pesticides with a number of diseases. Do you see that?
I see that statement.
Is that why Monsanto didn't want to do an epi study?
There is nothing here discussing Monsanto's view of it. This is simply the author's, you know, they're just updating people on what is the AHS.
I know, but I'm asking you, is that why Monsanto didn't do an epi study? Is it because experience has shown that these studies will associate widely used pesticides with disease?
I can't speculate about that. We're talking about a paragraph here where they're just simply describing the agricultural health study.
Exhibit 16 is a document titled Integrative Assessment of Multiple Pesticides as Risk Factors for Non-Hodgkin's Lymphoma Among Men. You see that?
I do see that. This
is an epidemiological study that you reviewed before?
Yes, it is.
It's one that Monsanto was fully aware of.
That's correct.
All right. And this was done by authors DeRoos et al. Do you see that?
I do see that.
One of those authors is Dr. Dennis Weisenberger. You see that?
I do see that.
You understand that this was a study that was essentially coming out of the National Cancer Institute?
Coming out of the National Cancer Institute. So we have to look at the author affiliations at the end to understand that.
Sure. Lead author, DeRoos, Division of Cancer of Epidemiology and Genetics, National Cancer Institute, USA. See that?
I do see that.
Okay.
And then the other, there's 3 others who are with University of Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa.
Okay. Now, this publication explored multiple exposures of pesticides and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, correct?
Yes, they were looking at ways to adjust for other exposures.
And one of those was, in fact, glyphosate, correct?
It was included in this study.
Okay, great. And when they did the analysis, the data in glyphosate, if you want to look at it, it's on Table 3. Using the logistical regression, showed a odds ratio of 2.1 that was statistically significant, correct?
All right. And they have a logistic regression and a hierarchical regression.
So in fact, the logistical regression that was statistically significant, that actually adjusted for exposure to every other pesticide on this list.
The logistic regression does include an adjustment for other pesticides.
You would agree, this study, sir, from DeRusse 2003, it added fuel to the fire created by the Hardell study.
So if you mean by fuel to the fire, it created a legitimate interest on our part, or a legitimate need for more study or a reliable basis to conclude there was some issue with glyphosate that Monsanto needed to look into in some other way, no, I would not agree with that.
Okay. Well, I'm handing you Exhibit 17. So we have this series of emails. These are email exchanges between various Monsanto employees, correct?
That's correct.
Included among those are Dr. Aquavella, Dr. Goldstein, Dr. Farmer, correct?
That is correct.
Bill Heidens is on there.
Yes, Dr. Heidens is there as well.
And if you look at the first email, it's actually citing the DeRusse articles we just looked at.
That is correct.
And he says, quote, "I'm afraid this could add more fuel to the fire for Hardell et al." Correct?
I do see that.
Right. And then if you look at the last sentence in his email, he says, "It looks like NHL and other lymphopoietic cancers continue to be the main cancer epidemiology issues, both for glyphosate and Alacor." Do you see that?
I do see that.
So we have Hardell, McDuffie, and now we have DeRusse 2003, right?
That's correct.
I'd like to talk to you. I just handed you Exhibit 18. That is another case control study. All right, so this is a case control epidemiological study, correct?
That is correct.
And it was published in 2008.
That's correct.
It's titled Pesticide Exposure as Risk Factor for Non-Hodgkin Lymphoma, including Histopathological Subgroup Analysis. You see that?
I do see that.
And it's, again, it has two authors that we've seen previously, Dr. Erickson as well as Hardell.
That's correct.
And there are some other researchers on there as well.
That's correct.
All right. And this is a study that Monsanto has reviewed and considered, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Now this study listed results for glyphosate, correct?
I'm sorry, it listed results?
It has results for glyphosate?
Yeah, yes, it does. It
Okay.
includes results.
And for glyphosate, there is a univariate result odds ratio of 2.02, which is statistically significant. And there's a multivariate analysis with 1.51, which is not statistically significant, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And the authors also looked at sort of an attempt at dose response, correct?
I believe they did.
Okay. And they looked specifically at, draw your attention to table 2.
Yes.
And they looked at glyphosate when it was less than 10 days and when it was greater than 10 days, right?
That's correct.
And when it was less than 10 days, it was an elevated odds ratio of 1.69, but it was not statistically significant, correct?
That's correct.
And when they looked at it for greater than 10 days, it was elevated 2.36, and it was statistically significant, correct?
That's correct.
And the authors report on the glyphosate data in this paper, correct?
Yes, they do.
All right. And if you look at starting on page 1661, bottom right paragraph,
That's correct.
it's talking about glyphosate, right?
Yes.
And then on the next page, it kind of goes into the actual study a little bit farther. The authors state, glyphosate was associated with a statistically significant increased odds ratio for lymphoma in our study, and the result was strengthened by a tendency to dose response effect, as shown in Table 2. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And then discuss their former study. Very few subjects were exposed to glyphosate, but a non-significant odds ratio of 2.3 was found. You see that?
I do see that.
We actually went over that study earlier today.
Yes, we did.
And then goes on to say, furthermore, a meta-analysis combining that study with an investigation on hairy cell leukemia, a rare NHL variant, showed an odds ratio for glyphosate of 3.04, and it lists the confidence interval. You see that?
I do see that.
All right. Recent findings from other groups also associate glyphosate with different B-cell malignancies, such as lymphomas and myeloma. Do you see that?
I do see that.
So we have Erickson. How do I spell his name wrong? I wrote that on the thing. You see that?
Erickson, yes.
Okay, great. Following the publication of this study, isn't it true that Monsanto then took it upon itself to actually combat the study?
Is there a particular document or documents
Do you have any knowledge about that?
I'd like to understand what you mean by combat. If there's a document you have, I'd be happy to review it.
Okay. Painting Exhibit 19. Right, so this is an email exchange. It's Exhibit 19. This is an series of email exchanges involving Dr. Farmer and other Monsanto employees, correct?
That's correct.
And if you look at the subject line, study shows herbicides increase risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma beyond pesticides, October 14th. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And if you actually go back and look at the actual origination of this email, you see that it's actually talking about this exact study, the Erickson 2008 study.
That's correct.
And if you look at the last sort of paragraph on here, the sort of last thing that's said on this I guess some sort of press release of some sort is avoid carcinogenic herbicides in foods by supporting organic agriculture and on lawns by using non-toxic land care strategies that rely on soil health, not toxic herbicides. See that?
I do see that.
All right. So then Dr. Farmer responds to this email that's been sent to her, right?
Yes.
And she says, and just to be clear, Dr. Farmer is responding to this email in the course of her business, right?
Yes, she is.
Okay. And she says, thank you for forwarding this. We've been aware of this paper for a while and knew it would only be a matter of time before the activists pick it up. I have some epi experts reviewing it. As soon as I have that review, we will pull together a backgrounder to use in response. Here is their bottom line. How do we combat this? Do you see that?
I do see that.
And then she actually pastes that sentence that we read at the very end of the article. You see that?
I do see that.
Okay, so Dr. Farmer is saying, how do we combat this? And this is avoiding carcinogenic herbicides in food by supporting organic agriculture and on lawns by using non-toxic land care strategies that rely on soil health, not toxic herbicides. You see that?
I do see that.
Okay, do you, as someone who speaks for Monsanto, is this something that Monsanto wishes to combat?
Could you help me understand? There's a problem I'm having here. Here is their bottom line, is the statement. I'm not sure who their is. Here is their bottom line, period, period, period. How do we combat this, question mark. She's not saying here is our bottom line, so I'm not really sure what this is referring to. I'm having a hard time understanding whether this is, it doesn't appear to be our bottom line. Donna's saying their bottom line.
Yeah, and she's combating it.
Yeah, I don't believe I can answer for Donna on this one. I can't be inside her head to explain what it is she meant by these words.
Well, sir, it's just basic English grammar, right? It says right here, here is their bottom line. How do we combat this? And then below that is their bottom line. Do you see that?
Again, the way this is written, I can't speak to what Donna meant by that.
I'm not asking to you what she meant by it. I'm asking you what it says right here on this paper.
I see those words.
Okay. So my question to you, sir, as a representative from Monsanto, is do you think it's appropriate for Dr. Donna Farmer to be discussing how they're going to combat this sentence, avoiding carcinogenic herbicides in foods by supporting organic agriculture and on lawns by using non-toxic land care strategies that rely on soil health, not toxic herbicides?
Again, I can't speak for Donna, for Dr. Farmer on this question.
I know, I'm asking you to speak for Monsanto. Is this appropriate, sir?
These are Donna's statements, and I believe they're most appropriately addressed to her. We cannot speak for what our employees, what their position is in an email written like this.
So all we can go on is what Dr. Farmer says here.
We'd have to go on Donna Farmer's own words. She can explain that.
She used the word combat, right?
That is a word that appears in her email.
Okay. So you mentioned this earlier. We were going through the epidemiological study. I'm looking at Exhibit 2 again. We've gone through Hardell's, McDuffie, DeRoos, Erickson. And you mentioned that between DeRoos and Erickson, there was a study published by the AHS, correct?
That's correct.
That was the original publication in 2005.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm going to write AHS 2005, okay?
Yeah, but it's DeRoos who's the author.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. There was a DeRoos, there was also an AHS publication in 2018, correct?
Yes, and that was Andreotti et al.
All right, we'll just put it in there, DeRoos. That work?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we had an AHS.
That was Andreotti.
How do you spell it?
A-N-D.
There we go.
There.
Oh, crap. 2018, right?
2017 is when it first appeared.
Yeah, but it was officially published in the journal.
Yeah, the publication date.
So we have the AHS, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the AHS. And I understand it's Monsanto's position, correct me if I'm wrong, that you guys believe the AHS is the most reliable and best of the epidemiological studies.
Our position is that the agricultural health study, with as described with the case control studies that they've done, or I'm sorry, as the cohort study, provides the most comprehensive look at pesticide exposure and health risk, particularly with respect to glyphosate and cancer.
Do you believe there's any problems with the study?
With the agricultural health study, is there a particular part of it? This is it's a very large study that looks at a lot of different endpoints.
Okay, well, fair enough. I'm not talking about the overall AHS study. I'm talking about these two publications right here in front of us that relate to glyphosate, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And so my question is, does Monsanto right now have any criticisms of the AHS's analysis of Roundup?
Could you help me understand your question a little more? Just in terms of...
What don't you understand?
Well, is there a document that you're talking about, or is it just in general speaking at a very high level about these two studies?
Listen, you're here to speak for Monsanto about its views and positions regarding epidemiology, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And I'm talking about two epidemiology studies, and I'm just asking you straightforward, do you think there's anything wrong with those studies?
We believe that both of those studies are of high quality and do provide valuable information.
So there's no criticisms that you can think of offhand?
We would have to go through the study line by line to understand that.
Now, it's true that numerous Monsanto employees have made comments about the AHS before the results were learned about, correct?
That is true.
And those comments about the AHS were not particularly flattering, were they?
Sorry. Is there a document that you would like to discuss?
Sure, we can go through them. I'll hand you Exhibit 20 to your deposition. So this is a document. It's dated July 22nd, 1997, right?
That is correct.
And this is obviously before Monsanto knew of any of the results of the agricultural health study as it relates to Roundup.
That is correct.
And this was a document prepared by John Aquavella.
Yes.
And he, at this time, was an epidemiologist employed by Monsanto.
That is correct.
And just by curiosity, does Monsanto currently employ any epidemiologists?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. After Dr. Aquavella left, do you know if they ever hired an epidemiologist as an employee?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, this was a document produced to us by your company in this litigation. I'd agree that Dr. Aquavella is discussing the AHS in this document. And I just want to point out a couple of things that I thought were pretty interesting. Let's go to the exposure assessment. You see that?
I do see that.
And you understand that one of the big criticisms that the plaintiff's experts have raised with the AHS is specifically about exposure misclassification. You know that?
I do. Yes, I have heard that.
Okay, well, let's see what Dr. Aquavella has to say. He says under exposure assessment, the exposure assessment in the AHS will be inaccurate. Do you see that?
I do see that.
He doesn't say could be, right?
I understand. I'm seeing the words on the page.
He says will be inaccurate, right?
He used those words.
And that's what he said about the AHS before he ever knew the results related to glyphosate or Roundup.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the next sentence reads, inaccurate exposure, the next paragraph, inaccurate exposure classification can produce spurious results. The conventional thinking in epidemiology is that exposure misclassification will most often obscure exposure-disease relationships. Do you see that?
I do see that.
I'm going to hand you another document. This is a document that I'm labeling Exhibit 21 to your deposition. So Exhibit 21 is a series of email exchanges, correct?
That's correct.
And they are email exchanges primarily related to correspondence within Monsanto's employees.
Yes, that is correct.
Specifically Dr. Farmer and a Thomas Clevorn.
That's correct.
Okay. And this document was created in the regular course of business, correct?
That is correct.
Good. All right. So there's a discussion earlier in the email about Hardell and other things, and I really want to focus on the email from Dr. Farmer on the first page.
Okay.
And that is from Dr. Farmer?
That is from Dr. Farmer.
And this is well before any results related to the AHS and Roundup have been published.
That is, let me make sure here's too.
Well, 99.
Yes, I understand.
Okay. She goes, Tom, you're welcome. Life is always busy. Work, home, work, home. The key is the balance. Regarding business, unfortunately, we feel that Hardell is just the tip of the iceberg for these type of association epi studies. We have his 2 papers with NHL and hairy cell leukemia. What is of greater concern, however, is an American initiative called the AHS. Did I read that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Then she goes on to kind of describe the AHS. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And if you look at sort of the last sentence in that paragraph, she says, these organizations believe that farmers and their families are suffering from a variety of illnesses and that these illnesses are caused by pesticides. No bias there. You see that?
I do see that.
Okay. She goes on. The widespread and ever-growing use of glyphosate caused the AHS investigators to reevaluate and give more priority to glyphosate. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay, great. So far she's been discussing potential biases that she believes may exist with the AHS.
Is that a question?
Correct?
Yes. Yes, that appears to be what she's saying here, that
Okay.
she's just describing what she knows factually about the AHS and expressing concern over bias.
Okay. And then she describes some more of the study. And then she just has this paragraph. She reads, many groups have been highly critical of the study as being a flawed study. In fact, some have gone so far as to call it junk science. It is small in scope, and the retrospective questionnaire on pesticide usage and self-reported diagnoses also from the questionnaire is thought to be unreliable. But the bottom line is scary. There will be associations identified between glyphosate use and some health effects just because of the way the study is designed. Do you see that?
I do see that.
All right. So she feels in discussing the AHS to this employee at Monsanto, Thomas Clevorn, she decides to relay to him that that people are highly critical of the study and have even called it junk science.
I don't really know what the basis is. She says some or many groups have been highly critical. I don't know what group she's referring to. She doesn't provide detail here to understand what the basis for this statement is.
She says the bottom line is scary, doesn't she?
Those are 5 words she includes here, yes.
She also characterizes the exposure classification in AHS as being unreliable, correct?
She uses the words is thought to be unreliable, but she doesn't clarify who's saying that. I think that's the challenge with this paragraph. Many.
I mean, she kind of endorses that view in this email. I mean, she says she finds it scary, and she's talking about other people calling it junk science, right?
I can't really speak to where what she was trying to say here. She appears to be relating statements from other people.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you testified that the only epidemiologist you ever know to ever have been employed by Monsanto, that you know of, obviously, is Dr. Aquavella.
That's correct.
We're back to causation, no evidence across the board. I want to talk about animal toxicology data, okay?
There's 14 total long-term studies
Okay.
that have looked at glyphosate and its ability to cause cancer in rats and mice.
But I understand, to be clear, that it's Monsanto's position, though, that none of those studies suggest or indicate that that glyphosate exposure causes the promotion or creation of tumors in rodents.
That is correct.
Okay. And just to be clear, none of those mice or rodent studies, those long-term ones, looked at Roundup, right?
The 2-year studies or 18-month studies, that is correct.
So Monsanto has done a long-term animal carcinogenicity study on formulated Roundup. Fair enough. Has Monsanto done a long-term carcinogenicity study on glyphosate since 1991?
We completed the studies that we needed to do for EPA registrations around the world in 1991. Other companies since that time have done additional studies.
Isn't it true that the EPA specifically asked Monsanto to redo a mouse study and it refused?
That is not my understanding.
So let's start from the beginning of the story. Okay, now Roundup was put on the market in the early 70s, right?
That's correct.
And it was approved at that time based on studies that Monsanto had submitted to the EPA in the 70s, right?
That's correct.
The only animal carcinogenicity study that had been done at that time, though, had been conducted by a laboratory called IBT, correct?
That is correct.
And it was subsequently learned after Roundup was approved by the EPA that IBT had been engaged in an unethical, fraudulent conduct.
That what happened in that situation was that IBT, there were some findings there that the results could not be verified. Monsanto at that point talked to EPA, and the decision was we can either keep going and let's find out where are the records. There was not a lot of confidence the records could be found, so we chose to repeat those studies at that time.
Okay, so let's back up just a little bit. People went to jail, right?
People went to jail.
So the timeline then, based on these documents from what we can reconstruct, is sometime before August 1971, he worked at Monsanto. And by August 31st, 1971, he worked at IBT. And at some point, by at least October 4th, 1973, he was back at Monsanto.
That's correct.
Okay. And you understand that Roundup was approved after Dr. Wright had returned to Monsanto, correct?
In the U.S., yes.
So Monsanto then redoes the mouse study, right?
Yes, we did.
And it was done at a laboratory called Biodynamics.
That's correct.
And that study has been published, and it's often called Knesevich and Hogan.
That's correct.
All right. And that study was completed in about 1983, is that right?
That's correct.
It was the study that was ultimately submitted again in 1983 to Monsanto to replace the IBT study. Prior to that, Roundup had been being sold on the market for about 8 years, right?
That's correct.
And during that time that it was being sold on the market for 8 years, there was no valid carcinogenicity study for Roundup.
That's the answer. We were not aware of the issues at IBT Lab at that time, so we and EPA and every other customer of IBT Labs had no way of knowing what had been going on there. Once it was found out, we took action to replace the study in consultation with EPA.
We're at Exhibit 25, and this is that memorandum by William Dykstra. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And it's reviewing the replacement mouse study, correct?
I'm sorry, what was the wording you used there?
The replacement mouse study, it's reviewing that?
It's reviewing the replacement mouse study, yes.
Okay, great. And it says conclusions. 1, glyphosate was oncogenic in male mice, causing renal tubular adenomas, a rare tumor, in a dose-related manner. Did I read that right?
I do see those words.
So Dr. Dykstra here is concluding that, in fact, based on this replacement study, there seems to be an oncogenic effect.
So again, this is Dr. Dykstra's. This is a memorandum he's writing to other people. It's not a final agency determination. He's speaking on his own behalf.
Sure.
His own opinion.
As a scientist at the EPA.
That's correct. It's his own opinion.
Independently reviewing the mouse data, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then number 2, the information on the oncogenicity of glyphosate was evaluated by a toxicology branch ad hoc committee, which concluded that this was an oncogenic response. A copy of the consensus report of the committee is attached. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay, great. I'm going to hand you the next document. So you've seen this document before, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay, this is a document from the EPA, correct?
That is correct.
And it's, well, the date on here is March 4th, 1985. You see that?
It's, yes, stamped at the top.
And it's titled Consensus Review of Glyphosate, right?
That is correct.
It's a document that Monsanto has considered in assessing its assessment of the safety of glyphosate.
That's correct.
All right. It reads, on February 11th, 1985, a group of toxicology branch personnel met to evaluate and discuss the database on glyphosate, and in particular the potential oncogenic response of glyphosate. Did I read that correctly?
That's correct.
And then it says the following persons were in attendance. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people listed. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And by my count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different PhDs. Is that right?
6. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then there's a statistician in there?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you see it's actually signed by every one of those people. Do you see it?
Yes, I do see that.
Okay. And one of them was obviously Dr. Dykstra, right?
That's right.
Okay. And it says right underneath all their signatures, the signatures above indicate concurrence with this consensus report, right?
That's correct.
All right. And if we turn to section E in this report, there's a classification of glyphosate. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And it reads, in accordance with EPA proposed guidelines, the panel has classified glyphosate as a Category C oncogen. See that?
I do see that.
I'm giving you Exhibit 28. So this is an internal Monsanto document. It's dated February 22nd, 1985, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So this is after that February 11th, 1985 consensus meeting, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And this was a document prepared in the regular course of Monsanto's business, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And it says right here, regarding meeting February 21st, 1985. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And it appears that there were different people who were present at that meeting, right?
Yes, it was a group of people.
And it looks like there were people from the EPA?
That's correct.
And there were Monsanto employees, correct?
That's correct.
And one person by the name of Fred Johansson?
Yes, I see that name.
Okay, and his initials would be FJ, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And in the document it says the meeting mood was relaxed, informal, and open. The toxicology branch had decided on a course of action on February 11th. You see that?
I do see that.
That's referring specifically to that consensus document we just looked at.
Yes.
It says FJ asked, quote, short of a new study or finding tumors in the control groups, what can we do to get this thing off Group C? Do you see that?
Just making sure I understand the full context of what they're talking about here. All right, yes, I do see that.
But it appears here that in a meeting with the EPA, FJ asked that short of finding a tumor in the control group, what will get this thing off Group C?
He also asked, so the full statement is short of a new study, so he's asking either a new study or if there was something else in the control groups. That's what he's saying here.
That's right. And at this point, the data from biodynamics and the data that the EPA reviewed didn't have any tumors in the control group for the kidneys, right?
They did not, and there's a mention up here of an agreement or a suggestion to relook at tissues.
Yeah, they're going to resection them, right?
Resection, let's take a look.
That's right. But as of, I mean, he's straight up speculating, short of finding a new tumor, what's going to get it off Group C? That's what he said.
That's not all that's there in that statement.
All right, I'm handing you Exhibit 29. So you've seen this document before, sir?
Yes, I have.
Okay. This is a memorandum also from the EPA, correct?
That's correct.
It's a document that Monsanto has reviewed and considered in its review and consideration of the scientific data in this case.
That's correct.
And it's dated February 26, 1985, right?
That's right.
So this would be after that meeting that was discussed in the previous document.
That's correct.
And it says here it's from Herbert Lacayo. See that?
Yes, the statistician.
He's a statistician with the EPA.
That's correct.
So we're talking about the mouse study that we've been talking about so far.
That's correct.
And he goes, the registrant, Monsanto, claims that such tumors are, quote, unrelated to treatment. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay. And he says in support of that, they provide historical data from biodynamics and 2 other laboratories, right?
That's what he says, yes.
Okay. So then if you turn to page 3 of this memorandum, you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, it's the last paragraph in the section above it, so just before remarks on false positives. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Under such circumstances, a prudent person would reject the Monsanto assumption that glyphosate dosing has no effect on kidney tumor production. Another way of saying this is that if glyphosate were truly unrelated to kidney production, we would expect to see 4 or more tumors in less than 1 out of 100 experiments of the type sponsored by Monsanto. Thus, glyphosate is suspect. You see that?
I do see that.
Well, let's see what the EPA statistician said. Turning to the last page, the first sentence is, we disagree with the registrant's position. Do you see that?
Yes, I do see that.
The registrant, that's Monsanto.
That's correct.
Okay. Go to the last sentence on that paragraph. The registrant wishes to avoid false positives, while those concerned with the public health wish to avoid false negatives. Hence, for this reason alone, Monsanto's argument is unacceptable. Do you see that?
Okay, so you just went down to the bottom.
Yeah, the last sentence in the paragraph.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I've got all the context here. I do understand that, yes.
Okay.
He said that.
And then you see the next, second to last paragraph on the page. Starts with viewpoint. Do you see that?
Yes, I'm just... Okay. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. It says, viewpoint is a key issue. Our viewpoint is one of protecting the public health when we see suspicious data. It is not our job to protect registrants from false positives. Again, registrants, that's Monsanto, right?
That's correct. Well, we are a registrant of a product here.
Okay. We sympathize with the registrant's problem, but they will have to demonstrate that this positive result is false. Do you see that?
I see that, and what's giving me concern is that this only identifies a single author, but then I get to this paragraph and they're talking about we, our. It reads very strangely.
Yeah, it sounds like someone's concerned with suspicious data, right?
Yeah, again, I can't really speak to what Herbert Lacayo was saying here, but he's referring to himself in the plural. And then as you look through this paragraph, it just becomes, there's misspellings and grammatical errors, and he's going well beyond what the topic of statistics here. So I'm not really sure what the basis is.
Okay. So following this study and following that conversation that Monsanto had with the EPA that we discussed earlier, Monsanto hired a guy by the name of Dr. Marvin Kushner, correct?
My understanding is that, yes, we did hire Dr. Kushner.
What was the purpose of Monsanto hiring him?
He was a pathologist.
What did you want him to do?
A pathologist's job is to look at tissues from animal studies to understand, is there evidence here of some disease outcome? Specifically, Dr. Kushner looked at slides from this mouse study to determine whether or not they were analyzed correctly to begin with. And
you would agree it would be highly unscientific for him to have an opinion about what those slides say before looking at them.
Is there a document that you would like to discuss?
You recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Seen it before?
Yes, I have.
All right. This is an internal Monsanto document dated April 3rd, 1985, correct?
That's correct.
So this is after that meeting with the EPA?
That's correct.
This is after that memo we just looked at from Dr. Lacayo, specifically discussing suspicious data.
That document was about a statistical analysis of a letter that Monsanto had provided.
This document was created in the regular course of Monsanto's business, correct?
That's correct.
And it reads, starting in the second paragraph, senior management at EPA is reviewing a proposal to classify glyphosate as a Class C possible human carcinogen because of kidney adenomas in male mice. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Dr. Marvin Kushner will review kidney sections and present his evaluation of them to the EPA in an effort to persuade the agency that the observed tumors are not related to glyphosate. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay. So, as of April 3rd, 1985, Monsanto was going to be hiring Dr. Kushner in an effort to persuade the agency that the tumors are not related to glyphosate.
Yeah, I can't really speak to what Dr. George Levinskas had in mind when he hired Dr. Kushner. His statement here is to T.F. Evans. I don't know what his conversation was with Dr. Kushner.
I mean, we could speculate, but we could just read what he says, right? He straight up says, right here, in an effort to persuade the agency that the observed tumors are not related to glyphosate. That's what it says, right?
Again, these are words from George Levinskas to T.F. Evans. Nothing here tells me what the conversation was with Dr. Kushner.
So that's April 3rd, 1985, right?
That's correct.
All right, I'm handing you Exhibit 31. Have you seen this document before, sir?
Yes, I have.
Okay. This is a document dated April 3rd, 1985, right?
That's correct.
Same date as the document we just looked at.
That's correct.
Okay. And it's a letter addressed to Dr. Marvin Kushner, correct?
Just make sure. It is directed. It is addressed to Dr. Kushner.
He says he's sending slides to. God bless you. He says here that he's sending slides to Dr. Kushner at the request of Dr. Long of Monsanto, right?
That's correct.
So if we compare the dates of the letter from Exhibit 30 and the letter which is Exhibit 31 with the memo from Monsanto, it appears that on the very date that Mr. Levinskas is saying that they're going to have Dr. Marvin Kushner help them persuade the agency that the observed tumors are not related to glyphosate, they're actually sending the slides to Dr. Kushner.
So the date of the letter from George Levinskas to T.F. Evans is the same as the date of the letter from Biodynamics to Dr. Kushner.
So unless George Levinskas somehow could see into the future, how could he possibly know that Dr. Kushner would help them persuade the agency that the tumors were not related to glyphosate?
I can't guess as to what was in George Levinskas's thoughts at that time.
Beyond what he wrote.
Yeah, all we have is what he wrote. We don't know that that's the conversation he had with Dr. Nezevich or Dr. Kushner.
And if we look right here at the back of it is a laboratory receipt. You see that?
Yes, I do see that.
And we have a signing. It's signed by Marvin Kushner.
Yes.
It's actually on April 14th, 1985, right?
That's correct.
It's 11 days after the memo by Mr. Levinskas.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So subsequent to this, Dr. Kushner reviewed the kidney tumor slides, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And he
actually looked at slides from all the kidneys.
That's right.
Just to understand if there were any.
And he discovered a tumor in the control group, correct?
In addition to some others, yes.
Okay. And Monsanto then had him prepare a report, and they submitted that report to the EPA, correct?
Yes, and that report showed the additional tumor in the control groups as well as some additional tumors that he found in the treated groups as well.
He writes, "The news you relayed to us on the preliminary results of the resections was very encouraging. We continue to believe that the result of all of these efforts will be that glyphosate is not shown to be oncogenic." Do you see that?
That's correct.
And he goes on, "We now feel it is important to begin to make plans and begin to prepare our strategy on how we will both submit the results and respond if the EPA does not accept our results." Do you see that?
I do see that.
"We ask your cooperation with the following, : Do you see that, sir?
I do see that.
So it appears that he's going to discuss Monsanto's plans and strategies, right?
He says it is important to begin to make plans, begin to prepare our strategy.
So he's talking about plans and strategy, right?
Yes, he is talking about plans and strategies.
Okay. Number one, we continue to feel it is important to identify and contact those outside, quote, experts, unquote, who we feel would testify on our behalf, both the EPA and SAP, that, based on the results, glyphosate is not oncogenic. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And then number two, we do not have a lot of faith that, presented with the same evidence, Ted Farber will want to back off and change his mind. Did I read that right?
That is correct.
Ted Farber, he was the head of the OPP at the EPA, correct?
I'd have to go back and check. I know he was with the EPA.
Okay, he was somebody with the EPA.
He was with the EPA.
Okay. Hence, we feel that it is equally as important to identify and contact, quote, experts, unquote, in the area of statistics who would be willing to testify both to the EPA and SAP that 1013 cannot be considered significant. Also, we will need opinions on the proper way to handle historical controls. Do you see that?
I do see that.
This is August 28th, 1985. It reads, "We appreciate your continued help in this area. It seems imperative that we continue to do all that is possible in order to have the agency reverse its decision. Hopefully the testimony of several respected quote-unquote experts will be enough to cause EPA to change their minds. Should you have any questions, feel free to contact either Tom or myself." Did I read that right?
Yes, you did.
You would agree with me that getting the EPA to change its decision about glyphosate being a Class C oncogen, that was really important to Monsanto.
What is important to Monsanto is, and has always been important to Monsanto, is getting the science right, making sure the data are accurate.
I don't see that in that paragraph. Do you see that in that paragraph? Getting the science right anywhere in there?
What I can tell you, this is a letter from Frank Surtee. What I can tell you, the company's position, we want to make sure we get the science right, that we actually have accurate data in front of the agency.
So as Monsanto predicted, there was in fact a scientific advisory panel convened, correct?
Yes, and this was following the discovery by the pathology working group and their conclusion that indeed these tumors were there.
And then actually the EPA then issued a guidance document ordering Monsanto to redo a mouse study, correct?
I don't know that they would, I don't believe I've ever seen a document, a guidance document that ordered Monsanto to do something. Typically guidance documents don't order specific companies to do specific things. It's a data call-in.
Okay, well, hand you Exhibit 36. This is a guidance document for glyphosate, right?
Yes.
From the EPA?
That is correct.
Dated June 1986, right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Turn to page 6.
Yes, I am.
All right, this is describing the mouse study, right?
At the very top?
Yeah, the
Yes.
first paragraph, okay. Toxicology Branch Ad Hoc Oncogenicity Committee tentatively classified glyphosate as a Class C oncogen. See that?
I do see that.
The studies were re-examined by a consulting pathologist, and data were submitted indicating that an additional kidney tumor had been found in the control males. No renal tumors were found in controls in the original examination. See that?
Yes, I do.
And that consulting pathologist was Dr. Kushner, right?
Yes.
Okay. The agency then requested that additional kidney sections from the mouse study be prepared and examined. You agree with that, right?
I do see that, yes.
The resultant microslides were examined by a number of pathologists. Those examinations revealed no additional tumors, but confirmed the presence of the tumors identified in the original study report. Do you see that?
I do see that.
The apparent lesion in the control kidney was not present in any of the additional sections. After examination of the slides, the agency concluded that this lesion did not represent a pathologically significant change. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay, so that was the agency's conclusion about this tumor in the control slide.
Yeah, this is their account of the historical
Yeah.
information regarding that.
Therefore, in order to fully address this question, the agency is requiring that this study be repeated with a larger number of animals in each test group so that the statistical power of the study is increased. See that?
I do see that.
So the agency did in fact require an additional study.
So what they're saying is the agency is requiring.
That's an order, right?
It would come in the form, so earlier on this document discusses data calling. So that's the mechanism by which they would do it. This could be, this document would be recounting perhaps conversations that the agency has had, but it's the official data call-in authority that the agency uses to say, submit a study.
Okay.
So that would be a separate document.
And in fact, Monsanto never redid the mouse study, did it?
We conducted a rat study.
You didn't do the mouse one.
We conducted a rat study, that is correct.
I didn't even remotely ask you about a rat study, so I don't know why you keep talking about that. I asked you, did Monsanto ever repeat the mouse study?
We did not repeat the mouse study because we were doing the rat study.
Monsanto regularly has personal conversations with people at the EPA, correct?
We have conversations with EPA representatives.
You guys share text messages, correct?
There are instances where EPA officials and Monsanto employees have texted each other.
All right. And finally, there's this last area of cell studies, and I'm actually not going to ask you many questions about that. But you'd agree there's been hundreds of studies.
Yes, that's correct.
You know, you'd agree that there are many cell studies that did show that were positive for genotoxicity, right?
Typically, those involve studies where they have somehow outright killed the cells, and as those cells decompose, they misinterpret that decomposition as evidence of genetic damage, but it is not true evidence of genetic damage.
Okay, so all those positive studies that show genotoxicity, it's your opinion and Monsanto's position that they're not reliable studies, is that right?
Typically, that's what I observed, is that when they treat the cells in a way that outright kills them, and that as those cells decompose, that decomposition is misinterpreted as genetic damage. But if there's particular studies you'd like to discuss.
If I go through all those studies, we will literally be here for a week. So I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to sort of make sure I understood Monsanto's position with regards to it. And that's why, and so though we've talked about epidemiology, we've talked about animal toxicology, and we obviously haven't talked about all the cell studies. We haven't talked about all the studies here, but we've covered some of them, right?
Yeah, examples.
Okay. And notwithstanding the stuff that we have covered, it's still Monsanto's position that there's no evidence across the board, right?
Yes, our position is that when you take all this data into account, you have a very large body of evidence saying we fully understand the carcinogenic potential of glyphosate and Roundup-based herbicides, or glyphosate and glyphosate-based herbicides, indicating there is no carcinogenic potential. There are additional studies that may purport to have findings one way or the other, but when you look at those in particular, they often have some sort of methodological flaw that prevents either a conclusive outcome or a reliable source of or from them being a reliable source of information.
Okay. Monsanto, following the IARC classification, and just to be clear, you understand the IARC has classified glyphosate as a class 2 probable human carcinogen, right?
I do understand that. We believe it's a deeply flawed classification.
Following the IARC classification, Monsanto hired Intertech to prepare a sort of expert panel review of what IARC did. You recall that?
I do recall that.
And that was ultimately published in a series of articles, correct?
I do recall that.
Okay. And there was a couple of scientists that we've been hearing about throughout this deposition that were involved in that panel, like, for example, Dr. Aquavella, right?
That is correct.
One of the primary points of contact for Monsanto related to the Intertech project was a person by the name of Ashley Roberts, right?
That's correct.
And Ashley Roberts was an employee of Intertech.
That's correct.
Also a scientist.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. So I'm handing you Exhibit 58. All right, so this is a series of emails that were between members of the Intertech panel that were then forwarded to Dr. Heidens, right?
Yes, that's correct.
This project with Intertech, that was part of Monsanto's regular and ordinary course of business, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, before the actual Intertech publications came out, the panel actually gave presentations, right?
That is correct. I'm aware of at least one presentation, yes.
And in preparation for those presentations, they create something called a poster, right?
That's correct.
This email exchanges appear to be discussing a poster for a presentation, correct?
They do, yes.
All right. And if we look at the look at an email, it's starting on page 2. Do you see that?
I do see that.
All right. And there's an email from Ashley Roberts at Intertech, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We are now looking for a title for the abstract and was hoping that one of the two versions below might fit the bill. Please let me know if you like one of these titles, and if not, if you could come up with an alternative version. You see that?
Yes.
We were thinking it could be something like, and then he looks like he proposes 2 possible titles, right?
Yes, he does.
The first one is Expert Panel Review of the Carcinogenic Potential of the Herbicide Glyphosate. See that?
Yes, I do see that.
And then, or something a little more provocative, like an expert panel concludes there is no evidence that glyphosate is carcinogenic to humans. You see that?
I do see that.
All right. Then you see a response from Dr. Thomas Sorahan.
Yes, I do see that.
And copied on that response is Dr. Aquavella,
Yes,
Dr. Garabrandt.
I do see that.
Dr. Sorahan, he was actually Monsanto's observer at the IARC monograph, right?
That's correct.
On glyphosate.
That's correct.
Okay. Dear Ashley, I prefer the first title. If something more provocative is wanted, then I think the second title should have no convincing evidence. We can't, well, okay. He says, we can't say no evidence because that means there is not a single scrap of evidence, and I don't see how we can go that far. You see that?
I do see that.
Dr. Sorahan is saying you can't say no evidence because that's going too far, right?
Well, I don't, just simply the words on the page, I can't
okay.
interpret exactly what he would say beyond that.
Dr. Garabrandt, he says, I agree with Tom's suggestion, right?
I do see that.
Okay. And then we have an email from Dr. Aquavella. You see that?
I do see that.
Dr. Aquavella, he used to work at Monsanto. We've discussed that.
That's correct.
In fact, to the best of your knowledge, he's the only epidemiologist that you've ever known to work at Monsanto.
That's correct.
Okay. Ashley, I agree as well that you can't say there is no evidence. If you want something more provocative, perhaps consider an expert panel review disagrees with IARC's recent classification of the herbicide glyphosate. I think that is the gist of the abstract anyway. You see that?
I do see that.
So Dr. Aquavella is confirming that you really can't say no evidence, right?
Dr. Aquavella is sharing his opinion here.
Yeah. And he says you can't say there is no evidence. That's what he says.
Simply, we have the words on the page that Dr. Aquavella wrote.
So we have these three experts that Monsanto has, consulted with, a former Monsanto employee, discussing this phrase, no evidence. Will Monsanto now change its position that there's no evidence across the board?
We will not change our position. These statements here, we would have to have more information from these scientists to understand what they literally meant and what they would identify. But our position is when you look across all that data, you look at all the epidemiology data, you look at all the animal data, you look at all the cell data, there's nothing there to indicate. When you look at all this stuff together, when you look at the individual columns of data, that glyphosate or glyphosate-based herbicides can cause cancer.
And so when you say there's no evidence, when Monsanto says there's no evidence, the only way you can really get there is by ignoring the positive evidence, right?
We do not ignore it. We consider all available information, just the way a regulatory agency would.
Well, you consider all the positive results and then find a way to say that they're bad, right?
We do not find a way to say they're bad. We study those studies to understand them and then critique them using internationally agreed scientific principles.
All right, doctor. I want to talk to you about regulators. All right, in the states, okay?
Okay.
So I'm not going to talk about anyone outside of the United States, just within the United States, okay?
Sure.
All right. I understand that there's various different groups of scientists and regulatory authorities that have some interaction with Monsanto as it relates to the safety of Roundup. Is that fair?
So just scientists and regulatory agencies?
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
And one of them, what you mentioned before, of course, is probably the primary one federally is the EPA. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm gonna put the EPA on here. But there's also other sort of groups within the United States that regulatory groups that assess or look at Roundup, right?
That look at Roundup. Could you be more specific?
So, for example, you've heard of the ATSDR.
So I wouldn't classify them as a regulatory agency. They act as an advisory capacity. They will take a look at a substance, and typically their advice is meant for EPA.
Okay, but it is a part of the CDC, right?
Yes, it is.
So it's part of the Centers of Disease Control, and they do look at the toxicology and potential risks of products like glyphosate.
But they look at a range of compounds.
Okay. So ATSDR. Do you know if to this day ATSDR has looked at whether or not glyphosate or Roundup causes cancer?
According to their website, they've completed the report and it's undergoing peer review.
Okay. So then we also have another group called OSHA. You've heard of them?
Yes, I do. Or I have, sorry.
What is your understanding of OSHA's interaction related to Roundup?
So that's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and their role is they have many roles. One of them is overseeing material safety data sheets.
Okay. And those are documents that sort of outline the warnings and precautions related to the use of Roundup in an occupational setting.
Their material safety data sheet, in my experience, covers glyphosate, the active ingredient, and then we cover the surfactants individually.
Okay. And so that's OSHA, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the last one that, and maybe if there's some other ones you want to let me know, please do, but the other one that I want to talk about is California's EPA. Are you familiar with California's EPA?
Yes, I used to work there.
That's what I was going to say. You, in fact, used to be employed by them, right?
Yes, that's correct.
While you were there, did you know Lauren Zeiss?
I knew the name, but I never met her.
Okay. And you know that Dr. Zeiss, she actually participated in the IARC monograph, right?
I do know that, yes.
Okay. And I think the organization's called OHIA, right?
OEHA.
OHIA?
O-E-H-H-A.
O-E-H-H-A, right?
That's correct.
And I'm just going to put under here Cal, so it's clear that this is not federal, which these other ones are.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So I want to kind of go through these generally speaking. Now, within the EPA, there's actually more than just one office, right? There's different programs.
That's true.
There's the OPP.
That's correct.
And there's also something called the Office of Research and Development, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you talk about the office within the EPA that has concluded that Roundup is not a carcinogen, you're talking about the OPP, the Office of Pesticide Programs, right?
That's correct.
All right. Okay. And then there's also this group called the Office of Research and Development. That's the ORD, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm handing you a document. It's Exhibit 74 to your deposition. So this is a document that summarizes the ORD's comments on the OPP's glyphosate cancer assessment. Do you see that?
I do see that.
It's dated December 14th, 2015.
I do see that.
This is a document that you've seen in your capacity at Monsanto, right?
I may have. I've definitely seen the content. This is familiar content to me.
Okay. So they had some scientists take a look at the report, and they're offering their sort of summary opinions in this document.
That's correct.
Okay. I would go down to paragraph 3, right? Do you see that?
I do see that.
And then the second paragraph within that, it's ORD's epidemiologist. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And it reads, ORD's epidemiologists agree with IARC that there is limited evidence of carcinogenicity in humans and understand IARC's definition of limited evidence as, quote, a positive association has been observed, unquote, for which a causal association is, quote, credible, but chance bias or confounding could not be ruled out with reasonable confidence. IARC Preamble, Section B6, end quote. See that?
I do see that.
All right. And then it says, OPP prefer to dichotomize the epidemiology evidence to be either causal or not causal. This dichotomization appears to be the major factor in the different positions between OPP and IARC with regard to the epidemiological data. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And this is talking about, instead of looking at all of the data sort of holistically, they're accusing, and I'm not saying that this is true, but they're saying that the OPP is really just saying yes, no for each study, instead of sort of looking at the whole picture.
I have the words here in front of me. So the Office of Research and Development is simply describing the ORD epidemiologists look at data this way, and the Office of Pesticide Programs looked at it in a way that they described differently from the way that ORD did their review. I'm sorry.
Okay. Then on number 4, it says glyphosate has been tested in large number of 2-year rat and mice studies, including several studies conducted in the same strains. You see that?
I do see that.
It says a wide range of tumors have been observed in these studies, including adenomas and some carcinomas. You see that?
I do see that.
It says the ORD reviewers noted that the analysis of the cancer data in the assessment was basically conducted on a study-by-study basis instead of using a more inclusive, systematic approach to provide an integrated analysis of the data. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Okay. But to be clear, at least we know from this third paragraph that ORD's epidemiologists agree with IARC, correct?
So I see the words written here on the page.
So going back to our exhibit here, we are in Exhibit 73. Under ORD, agrees with IARC.
So I'm not sure I would agree with that characterization.
All right, I want to move on to the next one, the far right, okay? Ohio in California, okay?
I do see that.
Now, Ohio, you've actually worked at the California EPA, right?
That's right.
And you understand there's something called Proposition 65.
I do understand that.
And under the Proposition 65 regulation, if IARC determines that a substance is a probable or known human carcinogen, OHIA and the state of California has to also determine that it's a human carcinogen, correct?
That is correct. They are not allowed additional scientific review. They simply repeat what IARC says.
Okay. So to be clear, so you agree then it follows IARC?
They do not do additional scientific review. They simply repeat what IARC says.
All right. So your testimony is that the California EPA, OHIA, does not do any scientific review?
Following a determination that you're describing from IARC, they do not do any subsequent scientific review. They simply repeat what IARC says.
And isn't it true that Monsanto, once this listing was made, went around and encouraged people to send in letters to OHIA to stop it?
Yes, because we believed it would be false and misleading.
Okay. And you had them send in letters that you actually wrote for them, right?
When we do public comment periods, particularly one where we feel strongly about it, we will provide sample letters to people. We will have what essentially amounts to a petition where people are able to do that. In this case, we did it because we believe such a listing would be false and misleading.
Did you also do it for scientists?
To my knowledge, we spoke with scientists about the false and misleading nature of the proposed listing.
Do you have any knowledge, or do you remember whether or not Monsanto authored any letters to OHIA in response to the notice of listing for any scientists?
My recollection is that we provided data and information that they may have found relevant to share. But of course, OHIA wasn't going to consider it anyway.
Okay. Well, I mean, why'd you do it then?
We submitted our own letter as well. The hope was that perhaps if we have this information out there, it may do some good. But OHIA has already told everyone we won't consider any science in this comment period. Okay,
so, and just to be clear, you guys submitted a letter that you knew wouldn't be used.
It was our hope that it could be used, the letter that we wrote on behalf of our company. Mm-hmm. But the language of the announcement says they would not be considering any scientific information.
Okay. Well, I'm going to challenge you on one of the things you said, that you guys just provided background. Okay, I'm handing you a document. 78. Okay, great. This is an internal email communication from Dr. Goldstein to a guy named Dr. Samuel Cohen, right?
It is an email from Dr. Goldstein to Dr. Cohen. Dr. Cohen is not with Monsanto.
That's right. Sorry. So, but Dr. Goldstein obviously is.
That's right.
And the subject is glyphosate and Prop 65, Sam Cohen.
That's correct.
And this is the document Dr. Goldstein prepared and did as part of his work at Monsanto.
That is correct.
Okay. And the first email reads, Sam, apologies that I was not able to get this out yesterday. I wanted to provide you a draft letter and was under the impression that a model letter was available, but this was not the case. We had models, but not appropriate to your expertise. I consequently had to pull one together. You see that?
I do see that.
And if you look at the back of this letter, this email exchange, there's an attachment. You see that?
I do see that.
And it is a draft letter, right?
I do see that.
And it is, if you look at the back, it has a bunch of stuff and commentary about it. And then it has a sincerely, you see that?
I do see that.
And there's no signature, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So Monsanto, at least in this context, prepared a draft letter for Dr. Cohen, right?
This actually reads very similar to a letter Monsanto submitted. But Dr. Goldstein here is explaining, there's commentary throughout this about providing draft information. People are able to do with it as they see fit. Dr. Goldstein even admits he doesn't have much of the information that Dr. Cohen would provide, and he would be able to add into this or not. It would be up to Dr. Cohen what he does with this. And again, it would not be considered by OHIA.
All right. So let's be clear. Monsanto wrote a letter for Dr. Cohen and gave it to him.
We provided him a draft of a letter that he could work with as he saw fit. And Dr. Goldstein acknowledges in here many times, edit as you see fit. You have other information that I know you're more of an expert in. And again, we know ultimately this any scientific information wasn't going to be considered by OEHA. They told us before the comment period started.
So let's go back to where we started. I asked you if Monsanto ever wrote any letters for any scientists. It appears based on this document, it did.
What he did is Dr. Goldstein gave Dr. Cohen some information that he could use. Here's a draft of something you want to work with. He acknowledges that Dr. Cohen has expertise in this area that Dr. Goldstein does not himself possess. Feel free to edit. And again, we know OEHA is not going to accept scientific commentary to begin with.
Okay, so I'm handing you document 79.
All right.
So this document is the letter that Dr. Cohen sent to OEHA, correct?
That is correct.
And if you look the last page of the letter, it's actually signed by Dr. Cohen, right?
That is correct.
And I don't see any reference to Dr. Goldstein on here, do you?
No, because this is Dr. Cohen's work.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Oh. Okay. Well, I mean, we're on the last page of that letter where the signature is. Let's go back to there. And I'm looking at the last page of the letter that was given to him from Dr. Goldstein. And if we're looking here on the screen, you'll see it. The last paragraph in the draft letter begins with "in closing." You see that?
I do see that.
And the letter that Dr. Cohen said last paragraph begins "in closing," right?
Yes, these two sentences appear to be similar.
I don't know. Look, they almost look identical, right? And the bottom one reads, the one that was given to him by Dr. Goldstein was, "In closing, I would reiterate that regulatory authorities around the world agree that there is no evidence that glyphosate causes cancer, even at very high doses, and that it is not genotoxic. I strongly disagree with OHIA's intention to list glyphosate under Prop 65. You see that?
I do see that.
Those are the words that Dr. Goldstein wrote.
And those are words that Dr. Cohen agreed with and left in his letter under his own decision-making.
Oh, did you talk to him?
No, this is his own decision. He's got his name on here. The email from Dr. Goldstein says, edit as you see fit.
Yeah, and he did.
Add your own expertise in. So we also see comment paragraphs here about IARC and their process and their scientific shortcomings that Dr. Cohen apparently added in. But ultimately, at the end of the day, OEHA wasn't going to be considering scientific information,
I understand.
such as this letter.
So this was a futile letter. This is your own words, sir. And to be clear, it's ghostwritten, correct?
No, that is incorrect.
How is that not ghostwriting?
There is additional information in here that Dr. Cohen appears to have produced himself.
Fair enough. That paragraph, this last one right here, that's ghostwritten.
I would not agree that's ghostwritten.
What would you call that, sir?
Dr. Cohen was free to do what he wanted with the language in that letter that Dr. Goldstein shared with him as an example of information.
And he chose to let Monsanto write his own closing paragraph.
Sorry, I can't speak for what was in Dr. Cohen's mind. All I can say is he chose to leave it in here because this is his work sent from the University of Nebraska.
And so your testimony, this is not ghostwriting?
It is not ghostwriting.
Okay. Not ghostwriting. But it's verbatim, right?
Those two sentences are the same as what Dr. Goldstein provided, but the remainder of the letter is quite different.
Notwithstanding the futility of discussing science with OHIA, Dr. Farmer went out and actually met with OHIA, didn't she?
She did.
She actually came to California, right?
She did.
Discuss science that you've testified was futile.
They, in OEHA's own notice, they said they would not be considering science as part of the public comment period.
So why'd she go?
Because it's important to present the science any opportunity you have, even if the odds are low that they're going to listen.
All right, Doctor, I've handed you Exhibit 81. Do you see that?
I do see that.
All right. So this is dated July 2017, right?
That's correct.
And this was 2 years after the original listing, correct?
It was approximately 2 years, I would agree.
And this was specifically the final decision of OHIA to actually list glyphosate as a chemical known to cause cancer, right?
Yes, they're announcing that effective July 7th.
I'm handing you document 82. So this was the notice of proposed rulemaking, specifically the no significant risk limit for glyphosate, right?
That is correct.
And this was posted in 2017, right?
That's correct.
And again, this, like the original listing, this one's asking for people to submit in comments, correct?
That is correct.
Scientific comments, right?
In this one, they're asking for a critique of the work they did that is based directly off of IARC's work. So that the scope of the information they can consider is limited to what IARC cited.
Sure, but they are considering scientific information, correct?
Yes, on that limited frame of information from IARC.
Okay, great. And they actually, they issued a report that they asked for people to have comments about, right?
That is correct.
Giving you Exhibit 83. Do you see this document, sir?
I do. I just want to make sure I'm familiar with the whole thing. Sure. All right.
Okay. So this is a document that reflects the initial statement of reasons for glyphosate, right?
That's correct.
And this document was submitted and prepared by OHIA, correct?
That is correct.
But remember we were talking about Sam Cohen a second ago?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is he a paid Monsanto consultant?
He has consulted with us on some topics in the past.
All right. So going back to this document in front of you, please let me know when you're ready to discuss it.
And this is 84?
That's right.
All right.
Okay, great. This is an internal email exchange within Monsanto.
That is correct.
It was a document made in the regular course of Monsanto's business.
It would appear so based on the evidence here.
Great.
Based on the text.
And so you see there's an email in the front and there's an attachment. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Let's go to the attachment. First page is Monsanto, social media outreach for Monsanto's California sites and people, a request for support. You see that?
I do see that.
And if we turn the page, broad objective. The primary objective and challenge that our social media plan is working to solve is to maintain Monsanto's freedom to operate with particular focus on California people and interests. Do you see that?
I do see that.
The challenge. The company is held up as the target of various interest groups, including those opposed pesticides and more. Their efforts have restricted our FTO, or freedom to operate, in various ways, including blocking sales of safe, sustainable solutions in certain areas, limiting our ability to attract and keep employees, imposing costly environmental restrictions on use of our products, limiting our development of new solutions, and ultimately sales of our products. See that?
I do see that.
Go back to this Exhibit 73. It's this chart we were using regarding regulatory reviews and what have you. And so we talked a little bit about OHIA, right?
Yes, we did.
Following IARC, right?
That's correct.
And then we also discussed that it does an NSRL analysis.
That's correct.
Okay, great. And the OSHA, we talked about it briefly, but I'll just fill it in. My understanding is that the material safety data sheet requires a disclosure of the IARC classification.
I've seen the material safety data sheet for glyphosate. It contains a mention of IARC and notes that we do not agree with it because it is not factually correct.
All right, so discloses IARC. Okay.
And notes our disagreement with their conclusions.
Sure. Notes Mon disagreement. Okay?
That's correct.
Okay, great. And then we talked about the ATSDR. That's an evaluation that's in progress.
That is undergoing peer review at this time, according to the ATSDR website.
Okay, cool. So we've kind of covered a couple of these different groups, and then we look at the OPP, okay?
Yes, I see that.
And so the OPP issued a report, right?
Are you talking about the issue paper?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. They issued a issue paper on carcinogenicity of glyphosate.
All right, so there's the OPP, and then so we have the report, right? Which is, I'm calling it, you called it a white paper?
Yeah, they describe it as a white paper.
White paper. And then that was submitted to the SAP, right?
Yes, for peer review.
And that's a scientific advisory panel.
That's correct.
And the scientific advisory panel is a group of independent experts who essentially peer review the OPP's work, right?
That's right. One of the main requirements is not being an agency employee already.
Monsanto took issue with people who were going to participate on the SAP, correct?
That is correct.
Specifically a guy named Dr. Infante.
That is correct.
Infante, I-N-F-A-N-T-E.
That's correct.
Why did Monsanto object to having Dr. Infante be involved with the SAP?
Our concern, we have a letter actually as an industry. CropLife submitted it. The letter itself speaks to some conflicts of interest that Dr. Infante appeared to have. That information was shared with EPA, and then he was no longer on the SAP. There was never a statement one way or the other about how EPA reached a conclusion.
And so to be clear, Monsanto objected to a specific person participating, and that person no longer participated.
That letter came from CropLife, an agency of which we are, or a trade association of which we are a member. The specific reasons for his non-participation, EPA would never spoke out about.
Monsanto,
Well, actually, they said he was unavailable. I'm sorry. That was their statement. He was unavailable.
and you would agree that the scientific advisory panel that was convened and did review the OPP's report was a group of good scientists.
So I don't have personal experience with those people. Monsanto's position is you want to have the best science in front of a impartial group of people at the science advisory panel so they can conduct an adequate peer review.
Does Monsanto have any evidence or reason to believe that the SAP was not impartial?
No, it's simply the concern that industry expressed prior to it was just to make sure, please make sure you've done taken all efforts to make sure this is impartial.
Now, before the SAP was convened, Monsanto's CEO, Hugh Grant, met with the EPA, correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
And he specifically asked the EPA not to convene the SAP, correct?
My understanding is that Mr. Grant shared the industry's concern that there was no SAP necessary, but if it did occur, please make sure it is unbiased and scientifically balanced.
Okay. I'm handing you Exhibit 87. This is a copy of the Scientific Advisory Panel report, correct?
That is correct.
And this is a document that you yourself, and this just before I move off from the chart we're looking at, and you can see up here on the screen, sir, this is the SAP that's reviewing the OPP work, right? All right, so you'd agree this is a fairly substantial report.
It is
99 pages.
Yeah,
right?
99 pages. It's a lot of reading.
Okay, and it was issued on March 16th, 2017, right?
That's correct.
And if we open up the document in the introduction on page 11, you see that there's welcome and opening remarks. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
And that was by Jack Hausinger, right?
That's correct.
And he was the director of the OPP, right?
That's correct.
And he's someone that Monsanto has had significant personal interactions with.
I'm not sure about personal interactions of any sort. What I can tell you is we interact with regulatory agencies and the people that work there to discuss science and the proceedings in front of them and how our products are proceeding through a review.
In fact, I mean, you guys have produced text messages between your regulatory guys and Dr. Hausinger, right?
I've seen those.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the EPA a little bit, and then we can be done with my questioning. Okay.
All right.
Now, we discussed this earlier, but there are text messages between various EPA officials and Monsanto, correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay. All right, Doctor, I've handed you the next exhibit. I believe it's 88. And this is a series of text messages, correct?
That is correct.
And these were text messages pulled from Mr. Dan Jenkins' cell phone, correct?
So if it is from Dan Jenkins' phone, if that's our understanding.
You read Dan Jenkins' deposition, right?
I have read his deposition.
In his deposition, he testified this was from his phone,
And
didn't he?
I remember him discussing that, if this is those Mongli numbers. Okay.
I'm representing to you this was, in fact, the document shown to Mr. Jenkins in his deposition, and he testified that this was from his phone. Do you have any reason to dispute that?
No, I do not.
All right. And the way it works is it says message outgoing, and that means it's something being sent from the phone, and then there's an incoming, that means the message is coming in.
Okay.
And then there's some personal conversations, and then it looks like there's an outgoing message to Christina Lawrence. You see that?
I do see that.
Who's Christina Lawrence? Do you know who that is?
Yes, she was on the Regulatory Policy and Scientific Affairs team. Well, she was the lead of our international team for that group.
Okay. And it looks like he sends a message to her, yep, I'm at EPA now for glyphosate. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And this is dated March 30th, 2015.
I do see that.
So this is after the public announcement of the IR classification.
That is correct.
Okay. Do you know what Mr. Jenkins communicated with to EPA at that meeting?
That I'm not aware of. I believe there is information on the docket at EPA where they shared a slide deck that we presented. But whether or not that was this meeting, I don't know.
Okay. All right, so let's turn to the next page, jump ahead quite a bit. Do you know who Mary Manibuson is?
Yes, she is a consultant at, I'm trying to remember the name of the company, the Exponent.
Okay. And she formerly worked at the EPA?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. And Mary Manibuson was actually helping Monsanto and consulting with Monsanto with regards to EPA issues?
It could be from this. I haven't seen the actual document. I know we work with Exponent, the company she works for.
Okay. All right, so the one saying a message outgoing, it's on, looks like it's June 18, 2015. You see that?
Yes, I do see that.
And that's to Mary Manibuson. You see that?
I do see that.
And Mr. Jenkins says, "Hi, Mary. Do you know folks at ATSDR and HHS?" Do you see that?
I do see that.
And that's that agency that was looking at glyphosate that we talked about within the CDC.
That's correct.
Okay. And then she says, "Yes. Where specifically?" You see that?
I do see that.
And then he responds, "On tox profiles." You see that?
I do see that.
And then she responds, or then looks like he says, "Yep," for some reason. And she responds, "It's been a while, but I can." Do you see?
Yes, I do see that.
And then looks like she says another message right after that, "Sweetheart, I know lots of people. You can count on me." See that?
I do see that.
And then it looks like she says, and then he says a message to her, "We're trying to do everything we can from having a domestic IARC occur with this group. May need your help." Do you see that?
I do see those words on the page.
A domestic IARC, that would be a determination by ATSDR that Roundup is a probable human carcinogen.
Yeah, I'd be guessing if I had to put myself into what is Dan trying to say here, or what is Mr. Jenkins trying to say here. My knowledge of ATSDR, in many cases, when they look at a pesticide, they are looking back to EPA to understand what did the agency conclude. In some cases, they will rely on that very heavily. In some cases, I've seen where they did not reach the same conclusion as EPA, and it was unclear as to whether or not they had reviewed EPA's risk assessment.
Okay. We actually have a discussion, an email that kind of discusses what they were talking about. I'm giving you Exhibit 89.
All right.
And keep those text messages handy. We are going to go back to them.
Look at that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
All right, so this is a series of internal email communications within Monsanto, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And these documents were created in the regular course of business, right?
It appears so.
Okay, great. And if we start at the very back of this proceeding, well, starting on page ending in 698, you see that?
Yes, I do see that.
This is an email from Michael Dykes, you see that?
I do see that.
Monsanto employee.
Yes, he is.
And
He was at the time.
okay. And he's titled a report on follow-up discussion, you see that?
I do see that.
And then down here it says, "I then asked for an update on ATSDR. He said they had checked with ATSDR and they were, in fact, doing a glyphosate review." See that?
I do see that.
Okay. I explained that this confirmed what we already understood, but our question was about the purpose and scope of such a duplicative review by ATSDR. I told him that we were concerned that ATSDR may come out any day with the report. You see that?
I do see that.
And this is back in 2015, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So over 3 years ago?
That is correct.
Okay. And then Dan Jenkins responds. You see that?
Let's make sure I got this straight.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he says, "Can you clarify what you're referring to regarding reports from ATSDR? They're not scheduled to put out anything for public comment until October. Has this been accelerated?" You see that?
That is correct.
And then Michael Dykes responds, the person I talked with at HHS said they had checked with ATSDR and confirmed the review of glyphosate. I explained that their review was duplicative and I was now concerned about another glyphosate review coming any day. He said he didn't know when, but didn't expect anything out of ATSDR for at least 2 weeks. You see that?
I do see that.
Okay. And then we have this email from Dan Jenkins. You see that? It's the next page.
Yes, I do see that.
And it's dated June 23rd, 2015. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And he said, spoke to EPA, right?
Yes.
ATSDR Director and Branch Chief have promised Jack Hausinger, Director of the U.S. Office of Pesticide Programs, to put their report, quote, on hold until after EPA releases its preliminary risk assessment, PRA, for glyphosate. Do you see that?
I do see that.
So it looks like Mr. Jenkins was speaking with Dr. Hausinger at the OPP, correct?
Well, he spoke to EPA. It's unclear whether this came straight from Dr. Hausinger or from someone else.
Okay. And according to what Mr. Jenkins is saying here is Jack Hausinger reached out to the ATSDR and they said they would hold off on their report until the EPA did its report, right?
It doesn't say exactly how this occurred. It describes communications between the ATSDR Director and Branch Chief and the Director of the Office of Pesticide Programs, but it doesn't say exactly, who was calling whom or where this information specifically came from.
Okay. It reads on, the EPA will not have the final meeting of its internal cancer review technical group until after the IARC monographs are published, and thus will not put out the PRA until after this. I'm guessing this would mean around mid-August. You see that?
I do see that.
And then it says ATSDR has cited a GAO audit report and arguing that their process is distinguishable and not duplicative. You see that?
I do see that.
They look at different endpoints and told EPA they don't make a call on cancer. But I think we should continue to be cautious. You see that?
I do see that.
All right. So then Bill Heidens, Dr. Heidens responds, right?
I see that.
He writes, distinguishable and not duplicative? Seriously? And I will believe the not making a call on cancer part when I see it. Anyway, at least they know they are being watched. And hopefully that keeps them from doing anything too stupid. You see that?
I see those words on the page.
Okay. Was it Monsanto's practice and policies to let agencies know they were being watched?
No, it is not Monsanto's practice or policy.
Okay. So then Daniel Jenkins responds, right?
Yes.
He says, completely agree. Mary Manny-Busen told me yesterday that EPA has had several issues in the past with ATSDR, coming to different conclusions. She said they tried to execute several memorandums of understanding, but were unsuccessful. She describes ATSDR as being very conservative and IARC-like in regard, as well as the fact that they are hazard-based. Do you see that?
I do see that.
This makes me very nervous, but I asked Jack whether or not he was worried about ATSDR coming out with something different, and he said he wasn't, and I think he was being genuine. Do you see that?
I do see that.
All right, so Mr. Jenkins is apparently having conversations about what Dr. Hausinger at the EPA thinks the ATSDR is going to do.
He says he asked Jack. Dr. Hausinger's first name is Jack, but beyond that, Mr. Jenkins is not more specific.
Okay, so let's go back to these text messages. And it looks like, if you turn to the page ending in 250,
yes, I see that.
all right, and we see close to the bottom, well, I'll stop right there. You see actually in the middle part of this, we have a series of text messages, and they're actually, looks like they're with Jack Hausinger, aren't they?
Okay. Okay, let me just make sure I understand how that's set up. So, outgoing gives you the date, the time, the statement, and then it says who it went to. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so this is saying this message went to Jack Hausinger.
Yeah, for example, it says right here, on September 23rd, 2015, Mr. Jenkins texted Jack Hausinger. Dr. Oz is airing a segment tomorrow on glyphosate safety. You see that?
I do see that.
Then it looks like he sent another message to Jack Hausinger. We will be posting a statement as soon as it airs. You see that?
I do see that.
And then it looks like another message. Cancer and IARC will come up. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Would it be common for Mr. Jenkins to be letting the director of the OPP know about a television show going on the air?
It may have been for Mr. Jenkins. We don't have a policy at the company either way.
All right, so then at the bottom of this, we're getting close to being done here. We have an outgoing message. Do you see that to Ty Vaughn again?
Yes, I do see that.
And just to be clear, who's Ty Vaughn?
Ty Vaughn at this time is the head of, let me make sure I get this straight. He is the head of our regulatory, so that he's the head of the regulatory branch of a larger organization. It's regulatory and government affairs, so he's got the regulatory side.
Okay. So he's kind of over a lot of the regulatory interactions with the EPA.
Yeah, so that would be, for example, Dan Jenkins would have reported to Ty.
Okay. And then it says, spoke to EPA re-GLY, right?
Yes.
And then he says again, Jones is being briefed next, then released PRA, still October. You see that?
That is correct.
He says, next, they will publish full IARC analysis. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Then he says, they feel they aligned EFSA on phone call. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Do you know what he's referring to there?
That I do not know.
Do you know if the EPA placed any pressure on EFSA to reach a specific conclusion?
Yeah, I am not aware of anything along those lines.
Okay. Then it says, push them to make sure ATSDR is aligned. They said they would. You see that?
I do see those words.
Okay, is your understanding that the EPA agreed to ensure that the ATSDR was aligned?
I have never heard any, in my personal capacity, I've never heard anyone at EPA saying they were going to tell ATSDR what to do.
So I'm handing you Exhibit 90.
All right.
And actually, before I hand this to you, I just want to ask you what you now know about a guy named Jess Rowland.
My understanding is he was an EPA employee. Just making sure. He worked for the Office of Pesticide Programs, and he was one of the people who signed the final CARC report.
Okay, so he was one of the people that was obviously played some sort of role in generating the CARC's analysis.
Yes, he was part of that process.
Okay, and that was the preliminary risk assessment we were talking about in those text messages?
That was my understanding, yes.
Okay, and I'm handing you Exhibit 90. Okay, so you have Exhibit 90. This is a series of email exchanges within Monsanto, correct?
That is correct.
An email exchange that involves Dr. Heidens,
That's correct.
Jenkins, and Jennifer Listillo.
That is correct.
Okay. And these documents, these emails were exchanged in the regular course of Monsanto's business, correct?
That is correct.
All right. I want to draw your attention to an email from Dan Jenkins dated April 28, 2015. See that?
I do see that.
And he says, hey, Cecine Jen, so Jess called me out of the blue this morning. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And this is referring to Jess Rowland.
Yes. That is my understanding.
And then it starts with a quotation mark. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And just to be clear, this is dated April 28th, right?
Yes, it is, April 28th.
So this is before IARC has published its monograph.
Yes, they've issued a press release, but not the monograph.
Yeah, and the monograph is like a 80 or 90 page document describing all the things that IARC thinks about glyphosate.
That's correct.
Okay. And so obviously Jess Rowland here doesn't have the benefit of that final publication yet, right?
Yeah, so at this point you wouldn't know what specific studies IARC relied on to reach their conclusions.
Okay. It says, we have enough to sustain our conclusions, don't need gene tox or epi. The only thing is the Cheminova study with the sarcoma in mice. We've had that study now and its conclusions are irrelevant because at limit dose, I'll stop right there. Did I read that right?
Those are the words on the page.
Because at limit dose, that's that 1,000 milligram issue we were discussing earlier, right?
Yeah, it could be. You know, I think here we've got Dan, despite his use of, or Mr. Jenkins, despite his use of quotes, it seems to be paraphrasing. This isn't written in complete sentences.
it's a little weird, if this is true, it's a little weird for an EPA scientist to be asking for a rationale for disregarding a tumor finding in a rat study, right?
Again, I'm not sure I'm not sure Dan is accurately transcribing what he heard. It could also be interpreted that Dan is saying because it limit, like Dan doesn't understand the basis. Dan was, his training was as an attorney and as an entomologist, so he wouldn't know toxicology. So he may be guessing here is what I'm saying.
Okay. I am the chair of the CARC, and my folks are running this process for glyphosate in reg review. You see that?
I do see that statement.
All right. I'm going to jump to the next paragraph. Also just called me for a contact name at ATSDR. And that's that agency we've been discussing for a while, right?
That's correct.
Because I passed on Jesselin's email. He told me no coordination is going on, and he wanted to establish some, saying, if I can kill this, I should get a medal. You see that?
I see those words on the page.
And they're in quotation marks.
I see quotation marks around those words.
Well, for what it's worth, this is dated April 2015, right?
That is correct.
So we're coming up to 4 years from then, and ATSDR still hasn't issued its report.
Yeah, all we know is that it's out for peer review. Then they've named the peer reviewers.
I'm handing you Exhibit 91, but isn't it true that before I hand this to you, Monsanto knew that Dr. Rowland at the EPA was planning to retire soon?
I'm unaware of our knowledge that we had about Dr. Rowland's retirement plans.
I'm handing you Exhibit 91. All right, so this is an email exchange within Monsanto, correct?
That is correct.
Stated in September 2015.
That is correct.
Goes from Mr. Jenkins to a significant number of Monsanto employees.
Yes, there are a number of Monsanto employees who are on the receiving list here.
Okay, and he writes right here, no questions, but Dr. Jess Rowland at EPA is quite proud of their recent endocrine conclusions and is also on point regarding their IARC response. You see that?
I do see those words.
Jess will be retiring from the EPA in 5 to 6 months and could be useful as we move forward with ongoing glyphosate defense. Did I read that right?
I see those words.
So Monsanto knew he was retiring.
Dan Jenkins was aware that he was retiring, and so he was sharing that information here.
And proposing that he would be very useful for ongoing glyphosate defense, right?
Yeah, those are the words on the page. From time to time we hire consultants based on their expertise.
But he's still at the EPA at this point, right?
Yes, he is.
And even though he's still at the EPA and he's in charge of the CARC's assessment at the EPA, you have Daniel Jenkins saying that he'll be retiring soon and that he might be useful for glyphosate defense, right?
I have no information in front of me to say that there was any conversation with Dr. Rowlands about him being a consultant for us.
While he was working at the EPA?
Yeah, I am unaware of any conversations, actually, about him working as a consultant for us.
This email suggests that there might have been one, correct?
Yeah, again, I have no information to indicate that Monsanto had a conversation with Dr. Rowlands about being a consultant for us.
All right, Doctor, can you pull up the text message exhibit? All right, turn to page ending in 251.
Okay.
Okay. And then you see there's a discussion. Looks like it's a outgoing message from Dan Jenkins on October 1st, 2015. Do you see that?
I do see that.
To Philip Miller. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And he says, remember that ATSDR said it would render its view in October as well. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And then he says in the next text message also to Philip Miller. Who's Philip Miller?
He is the Director of Regulatory, and at this time, he was the Director of Regulatory and Government Affairs for Monsanto.
Okay. And it says, told EPA to please reach out and keep them aligned. Do you see that?
I do see those words.
So isn't it true that, in fact, Monsanto reached out to the EPA and asked them to make sure that the ATSDR was aligned?
Yeah, I can say that those words that you read appear here. Because it's a text message, it's hard to know, if you're not actually the person in the conversation, what do they mean. But I would agree those words appear on this page.
Okay. And you see there's a text message on December 2nd, 2015.
Yes, I do see that.
And it's incoming, and it's from Philip Miller, right?
That's correct.
And Philip Miller, just to be clear, that would be Jenkins's boss, right?
Yes.
Okay. He says, we need to share with EPA political and career staff. They need to get glyphosate PRA out now. They are losing credibility. You see that?
I do see that.
And then, looks like there was actually quite a few people on that text message. And then there's an incoming text message, also again from Philip Miller. You see that?
I do see that.
It's apparently a few seconds later. It says, CBS News asked Hugh today if glyphosate causes cancer. Let them know they're failing their duty to the public. You see that?
I do see those words.
Hugh, that's Hugh Grant?
Based on my memory,
Yeah.
as in my personal capacity, my memory is, yes, that is Hugh Grant.
Okay. Then looks like there's an outgoing message from Mr. Jenkins. You see that?
I do see that.
Speaking to Jack in about an hour. We are in a meeting now working on drafting a response. Speaking to scientists tomorrow morning. You see that?
I do see that.
Do you know if the scientist he's referring to is Jess Rowland?
No, I do not know who that refers to.
Okay. So according to Bradbury, what we need to do is get some key Democrats on the Hill to start calling Jim. This helps in several ways. Focuses on Gly and gets him to move. Shoots across his bow generally that he is being watched, which is needed on several fronts, and finally sets the stage for possible hearings. I laid this all out yesterday with Michael before our call, and he agreed. Do you see that?
I do see those words.
Do you know who Michael he's referring to?
Let's see. So earlier we had the mention of Michael Dykes, and so that was my understanding would be this would be Michael Dykes from our Washington, D.C. office where Dan works.
And so it looks like they were laying out a plan to work with key Democrats on the Hill to let them know that they were being watched.
Yeah, this would be, just because it's a text message and you don't have, very complete sentences, this would be something that Dan, I think, could shed light on better than me. But I do see those words on the page.
So again, we have another reference to people being watched. Do you see that?
I see the word watched on this page.
So let's start with your some stuff about your personal background. How long have you, who do you work for?
I work for Bayer Crop Science now. Prior to that, it was Monsanto.
How long had you worked for Monsanto?
I started in 2007, so now it's been 12 years.
Where do you live?
In St. Louis.
Are you married?
Yes, I am.
Do you have family in the area?
Yes, I do. We have 2 daughters, and I also have my parents are here, and then some aunts, uncles, and cousins.
Where did you grow up?
In St. Louis as well.
Where did you go to high school?
Kirkwood High School.
What was the next job you had?
Following that, I worked for the University of Missouri, and that was as an environmental health technician.
And was that from 1995 to 1996?
That's correct.
What did you do as an environmental health technician at the University of Missouri?
I had 2 parts to that role. One was doing fire and safety inspections in laboratories, and then the other one was hazardous materials management. And so that was any kind of hazardous material that laboratories or farms would have, and we would help them make sure it was being handled appropriately.
What was the next job you had?
Following that, I was a graduate research associate at Texas A&M University as part of going to graduate school there.
So that was from 1996 to about 2000?
That's correct.
What was the next position you worked in?
After that, I was a postdoctoral researcher at the University of California at Davis.
So after you finished your postdoc research efforts, what was the next job you had?
Then after that, I worked for the California EPA, and this was for the State Water Resources Control Board. I was an environmental scientist, but my focus was on freshwater standards.
What office of the California EPA did you work at?
So that was the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the office within California EPA that's responsible for protecting water quality across the state.
And was there a physical location where you worked?
Yes, that was in Sacramento, downtown Sacramento.
So you were working at the California EPA on freshwater standards. How did that What exactly did you do with respect to protecting the clean water of California?
Well, you had two functions in our group, and I worked on both. One was developing new water quality standards. You know, whether there was one that the state was proposing to come up with itself, so this would be you know, a limit on some pollutant in water. One I worked on a heavy metal called selenium was one of them. The other part of it, so that was, you know, we're adopting a new water quality standard or number for a contaminant. The other half of it was reviewing actions by the regional water quality control boards. They're the part of Cal EPA that issues permits, say to a wastewater discharge, like a sewage treatment plant. And if the entities they had issued the permit to disagreed with the permit, they could appeal to the state, and then I would provide a technical review of the complaint and the response to it.
About how long did you work protecting California's clean water?
It was about 2 years and 8 months.
What was the next position you took after completing your time at the California Water Board?
After that, I took a role with Tetra Tech. It's an environmental consulting firm, and that was back in St. Louis, which is where I was from.
So you moved back to St. Louis at that time?
That's correct.
And that was 2004?
That's correct.
And Tetra Tech, you said it's an environmental consulting firm?
That's correct.
What was your position there?
I was a human health and environmental risk assessor.
Thank you. So am I correct that after you completed your time at Tetra Tech, you took a job at Monsanto?
That is correct.
And what was the first position you had at Monsanto?
I was a biotechnology regulatory affairs manager.
How did you decide to start working at Monsanto?
Well, at that time, you know, much of what they were focused on, certainly on the biotechnology side, was very interesting to me. They had several projects, one of which I was very interested in was drought-tolerant corn. And they had an opening within the Biotechnology Regulatory Affairs group, and because of my background in regulatory work, I decided to apply. One of the groups I worked with fairly heavily early on were beekeeping groups. And as we talked to them, one of our understandings became that, you know, they have financial problems. Part of that is the result of honey prices. You know, this is one of the main things that they're selling from their crop of bees is honey. And the challenge is that honey is coming into the U.S. This is specific to U.S. honey growers. Honey is coming into the U.S. from overseas that may not be entirely honey. It may have corn syrup or rice syrup added to it to dilute it, but they're still getting the same price as honey, and this depresses the price for U.S. beekeepers. The more honey on the market, the lower the price they get, even though this other honey-like material isn't really honey. And they were wanting the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to create a honey identity standard to make sure that honey being sold in the U.S. is actually honey. And then that would actually help them with prices. It would make their businesses more financially viable.
Was there another part of your work as the crop protection safety and outreach lead?
Yes. The other thing I was working on there were developing materials that discuss the benefits and safety of our products.
I'm going to hand you what I'm going to mark as Exhibit 93. Is Exhibit 93 a document, a business record that you prepared when you were working as the crop protection safety and outreach lead?
Yes, it is.
So based on facts and research that you did to prepare it?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare it about the time that you acquired those facts and research?
I did.
Did you prepare it as part of your job?
Yes, I did.
Was it part of did you prepare it in the ordinary course of business at Monsanto?
I did.
And was this document marked Exhibit 93 used by Monsanto?
Yes.
How was it used by Monsanto in its business?
We have this posted on our website. We also have this, we bring copies of this along in booklet form and we share it, you know, with audiences. When I go out and talk to groups, I'll bring along, you know, at least one copy to show them and direct them to it. Sometimes I bring along multiple copies to hand out. When we have a trade show or a scientific meeting where we have a booth in the exhibition hall, we'll have copies of this available.
Well, we'll come back to Exhibit 93 in a minute. Let me finish your employment history.
Sure.
What was the next position you held at Monsanto?
Starting in November of 2018, I joined our Agricultural Affairs and Sustainability team, and in that organization, I'm the Global Health and Safety Issues Management Lead. And so it's similar to the work I was doing before, but it has responsibilities across our portfolio of products rather than just crop protection alone.
Okay. So let's discuss a little bit about glyphosate itself.
Sure.
Is glyphosate an herbicide?
Yes, it is.
What is an herbicide?
Herbicides are molecules that you can use, or chemical you can use to kill a weed.
What's the history of realizing the weed control potential of glyphosate?
This is a molecule that Monsanto initially discovered its weed control properties. Other companies had developed ways to synthesize glyphosate over the years as part of their own work, but they did not realize it could work as a herbicide. Monsanto, as part of research into herbicidal compounds, was synthesizing molecules, looking at different ideas we had internally about trying to answer the question of would this chemical structure work as a herbicide. And after a few rounds of work, glyphosate was identified, and it was tested under greenhouse conditions and found to actually be effective.
Who discovered the herbicidal properties of glyphosate?
It was Dr. John Franz.
When did he make that discovery?
That was he was doing the synthesis work, and I believe the discovery of its ability to act as a herbicide was 1970.
Was there anything unusual about the herbicidal properties of glyphosate?
Yes, glyphosate acts on a broad spectrum of weeds, so that means it kills grasses as well as broadleaves, which are plants like clover. It also acts systemically, so when it's absorbed by the plant, it goes down to the root, and it can kill a weed at the root, so it won't grow back. And this combination I'm not sure there was another product on the market like that at the time, and I don't believe there is now.
Was testing done at the time to evaluate the safety of glyphosate?
Yes, safety testing was conducted early on in the process.
What was favorable about glyphosate's safety profile?
We had the data were demonstrating to us there was low toxicity, both to humans and animals. It was not accumulating in the environment, it was breaking down, and that it was excreted rapidly from the body.
Was the discovery of glyphosate and the safety testing that accompanied it, did that result in glyphosate being registered for use in various countries?
That's correct.
Was it registered for use in the United States?
Yes, in the United States in 1975, with the first sales occurring in 1976.
Are you aware today that, how many countries have registered glyphosate for use?
It's over 100.
How does the use of glyphosate worldwide compared to other pesticides that are used?
It is the most commonly used herbicide around the world.
All right, so do you remember that you were asked a number of questions about the mouse and rat studies that were originally, well, not originally used, but were eventually used by Monsanto to register glyphosate with the EPA?
I do.
And there was a 1983 mouse study by Knesevich and Hogan.
I do remember that.
And as a result of that mouse study, did the EPA reach a preliminary conclusion about the carcinogenicity of glyphosate?
They did have some preliminary conclusions. They were not made final by the agency.
Do you remember that there was a document you were shown where Monsanto had hired somebody named Dr. Kushner to review the mouse biopsies?
I do recall that.
Did Monsanto tell Dr. Kushner what he should find with respect to his review of those mouse biopsies?
No, Monsanto did not do that.
How do you know that?
So Monsanto, when we work with external experts, when you're talking about the science experts, The idea is that you want to find someone who knows their field, who understands the material that you're asking them to investigate and advise us on. But we also make sure, we're not going out there and telling them, we don't engage an expert and say, this is what we want you to find. Please do the following. It's please look into this and tell us what you find.
Now, it may be obvious, but why wouldn't you tell an expert what to find?
So if you're doing that, they're not really acting as an expert. But more importantly, when you're doing something as serious as dealing with a regulatory agency, putting information in front of them for them to make a conclusion, if you give them, information that's false, that's not going to. They're going to waste their time reviewing that, and then they're going to come back to you and say, not only did you waste our time, you gave us false information. That's not a productive interaction with the regulatory agency. You want to make sure you're giving them as much factual information as possible so that you're able to obtain the registration or the approval.
Is Exhibit 95 the conclusion of the EPA about the proper classification of glyphosate based on mouse and rat studies?
Yes, following the 2 rat studies and the mouse study we discussed previously.
So let's talk about those studies for a moment. The first rat study was found to have inadequate dosing of the rats, right?
That's correct. The agency at the time expressed concern that the doses were too low to really inform full assessment. And since that time, other regulatory agencies around the world have concluded the same thing about it, that we have better data to rely on than this.
Did Monsanto commission a replacement or repeat rat study to dose the rats with more glyphosate?
Yes, we did.
And at the same time, they also performed the mouse study that we heard so much about yesterday.
Yes, the mouse study was underway first, and the rat study began later on. So the mouse data were available first.
Now, when the mouse study received a number of different reviews at the EPA, right?
That's correct.
And there was some disagreement along the way about what that first mouse study really showed.
That's correct.
But in the end, a number of experts reviewed that mouse study and concluded that it provided evidence that glyphosate was not carcinogenic. What did the EPA ultimately conclude about that first mouse study?
So based on the documents that I've seen, they concluded that they wanted, as we discussed yesterday, they wanted a repeat of the mouse study. Through conversations with them, we said we have a rat study coming. Let's see what that study shows, and then at that time decide, do we need to do another mouse study?
Okay, and is that recorded on page 4 of Exhibit 95? Well, let me ask it this way. Do you see the second full paragraph on page 4 of Exhibit 95?
Yes, I do.
With HED?
I do see that.
It says HED deferred a decision on the repeat of an additional mouse oncogenicity study until the 1990 rat feeding study had been evaluated by the peer review committee.
That is correct. That's what it says.
Did the EPA, so we heard questions yesterday about the EPA wanting a mouse and a rat study, and Mr. Wisner suggested that Monsanto refused to do one of the studies the EPA wanted. Is that a fair understanding of what happened here?
No, what the EPA is describing here is that the Health Effects Division is HED. They deferred their decision about whether we needed another repeat mouse study until they could see the results of this repeated rat study.
So, are you familiar with the results of the repeated rat study?
Yes, I am.
And what did the repeated rat study show about the safety of glyphosate?
EPA concluded that this repeated rat study, along with the existing mouse study, supported a conclusion that glyphosate could be classified in Group E.
What is Group E? Well, let me just direct your attention to the final page of Exhibit 95. It says classification. You see that?
I do see that.
And there it says, considering criteria contained in EPA guidelines for classifying a carcinogen, the committee concluded that glyphosate should be classified as a Group E, evidence of non-carcinogenicity for humans, based on lack of convincing carcinogenicity evidence in adequate studies in 2 animal species. You see that?
I do see that. That's what they concluded here.
And so Group E means what?
Group E, their description of it is evidence of non-carcinogenicity for humans. And that was their definition here in 1991, following that review.
What were the 2 species in which non-carcinogenicity had been proven by studies?
In rats and mice. Those are the 2 species.
Are you aware of any rat or mice studies the EPA wanted Monsanto to perform that it didn't perform?
No, I am not.
Is that even a feasible thing to have happen?
To conduct a rat or a mouse study?
To refuse to conduct a rat or a mouse study that the EPA asks you to perform?
Yeah, once they issue, we talked yesterday about a data call-in. And so that's how EPA can order a registrant to turn in data. You can have discussions about EPA, with EPA about data requirements and whether things are needed. But if they decide you're going to do something, you don't have a choice in that. In order to maintain your product registration, you have to give them the data they're asking for.
We heard some questions of you yesterday about whether Monsanto tests formulations, the combination of glyphosate and surfactants to form Roundup. Remember that?
That's correct.
Are there tests that the company performs on its formulations, on its Roundup formulations?
Yes, we do. We look at dermal penetration. We discussed those earlier. We're looking at the formulated product, how much glyphosate crosses the skin and enters the body. And what we see there is very low penetration, regardless of what surfactant is there and regardless of whether a surfactant is there. It's less than 1% of what's on the skin. The other thing we do is, these are called genotoxicity assays. So these are studies, we earlier referred to them as cell studies. These studies allow us to understand whether or not the formulated product damages DNA. It's gene for genes. Whether or not the formulated product damages DNA in a way that would be indicative of a chemical that can cause cancer. And when we look at those studies, these are being conducted according to international protocols. These are protocols that governments around the world have agreed this is how we should do this sort of a test to get reliable results. We do it according to those protocols, also under good laboratory practices to ensure the data are traceable, that they've been well documented, and that you can recreate the study, and that in particular the agency can come and audit those findings. They can come order you to turn over the data so it can be looked at. Those studies also tell us glyphosate-based herbicides are not genotoxic. And then finally we also do a series of about 6 toxicological screening studies that look at more short-term toxicity into some short-term into medium-term toxicity studies, just to make sure we understand that the formulated product is behaving the same way as the individual components.
There was a series of questions where you were asked if Monsanto had ever done a long-term carcinogenicity study on Roundup.
I do recall that.
What are the problems with performing a long-term carcinogenicity study on a formulated product like Roundup?
There are a few reasons, several reasons actually, why we haven't done that kind of a test with the full formulated product, to go for a 2-year-long study in rats or 18-month study in mice. First of all, when we look across the data we have available, when we look at the epidemiology data, what we're seeing is a consistent message from those studies that whether you're talking about the cohort studies, the agricultural health study reports, there is no relationship between glyphosate and cancer. When we look at the case control studies, some of the ones we discussed yesterday, DeRoos, McDuffie, studies like that, what we see is that when you adjust for other exposures in these people's lives, the relationship between glyphosate use and cancer diminishes and becomes non-statistically significant. So the epidemiology data overall are telling us there really isn't a relationship here. When we look at the information we have about glyphosate and the surfactants by themselves, we're also seeing information, all the information we have from these studies conducted according to international protocols under good laboratory practices are telling us there is no relationship between glyphosate and these surfactants and the ability to cause cancer in an experimental system. So we know from human data gathered under real-world conditions, we know from experimental system data, whether that's animals or some of the cell studies we mentioned, we're not seeing anything there that's telling us there's a reason to do that sort of testing. And then, the other issues you think about it is the feasibility. So we have this problem.
So let me.
I'm sorry.
Now, I interrupted you. You were about to explain the feasibility problems that might exist if you tried to perform a long-term carcinogenicity study on rodents.
Yes, our concern there
on formulated product.
With formulated product, yes. The concern we have about feasibility is whether or not you can obtain useful data. Can you get data from a study like that can answer the question in a way that is meaningful? When you think about feeding an animal a surfactant, these are essentially soaps. If I give them too large of a dose, they're going to get sick. Soaps, surfactants, when you feed them to animals, they cause irritation in their stomachs. They're either sick or they won't eat. Sick animals, you do not conduct studies on sick animals for 2 years and get meaningful data at the other end. So we need to be very careful about that. The challenge comes when if I have a formulated product, I need to keep the ratio of glyphosate to surfactant the same as it would be, in the product. And in order to have enough glyphosate in there, so one of the issues we mentioned earlier, the first rat study, they said the glyphosate doses were too low. This isn't meaningful. So we need to be able to reach a certain level with glyphosate. In order to reach those levels with glyphosate, to have confidence that if we're going to see something we would have, the surfactant at that point is so high, you've made the animals, you've essentially irritated their stomachs, their digestive system so much, they're not going to eat, they're going to be sick animals. And so that, at that point you realize there isn't much feasibility there. We're going to have to think about other ways to answer that kind of question. And we already have that information that we need. As I mentioned, the epidemiology data are telling us we don't have a relationship between glyphosate-based herbicide use and cancer. The animal data are telling us we're not seeing anything here that would indicate the ability to cause cancer. And then the cell studies, these mechanistic studies we talked about, also show us, whether it's with the formulated product or the individual components alone, these products don't result in some change, either in whole animals or in cellular systems and cells growing in a laboratory that would indicate the potential to cause cancer.
Now, during your questioning by Mr. Wisner, you were asked a number of questions about Exhibit 20. Do you remember that?
I do recall.
And one of the questions you were asked about is whether John Aquavella voiced concerns that the AHS study would be inaccurate or unreliable.
That's correct.
If you look at the page with ending in 873, you see that that's where John Aquavella puts out some thoughts about the exposure assessment that the AHS would use.
That's correct.
And you see that he notes that he has some concerns about whether the AHS will adequately identify previous exposures and We'll let you stop there, previous exposures.
Yes, I do see that.
Did the people who conducted the agricultural health study respond to criticisms like those made by Dr. Aquavella to improve their study protocol?
Yes, they did.
What did they do in response to criticisms from Dr. Aquavella or others like him?
So one of the things that they talk about here is the study questionnaires. You know, can you get accurate information from people? You know, if I ask you a question today and then I come back in a year, do I get the same answer? They looked at that, and the agricultural health study researchers published on that and showed, yes, we have high confidence in our survey to provide us useful information.
So they validated their surveys and showed that the concern that Dr. Aquavella had voiced had been remedied.
That's correct. They published that. The other thing they did is look at, we have a study that they incorporated, and that's where the intensity-weighted lifetime days comes in.
So I'm going to hand you that study. Is that a study that Dr. Aquavella actually performed?
Yes, he is the main author on that.
So I'm going to hand you
publication.
What's been marked as Exhibit 98. This is an article with John Aquavella as the lead author entitled Glyphosate Biomonitoring for Farmers and Their Families, Results from the Farm Family Exposure Study. See that?
Yes, I do.
Is this exhibit, did I mark it? 98?
98.
This is Exhibit 98, commonly referred to as the Farm Family Health Study.
Farm Family Exposure Study.
Farm Family Exposure Study. Is Exhibit 98 one of the things that Monsanto did to help improve the agricultural health study?
Yes, it is.
And what did Dr. Aquavella conclude about the exposures of people who apply glyphosate?
What Dr. Aquavella and his co-authors here, this is, you know, John Aquavella, Dr. Aquavella at Monsanto, and he also has researchers from University of Minnesota and Emory University in Atlanta, as well as Exponent, which is a consulting company. Dr. Aquavella and his co-authors found that exposure to glyphosate was actually very low among farmers and their families.
If you would turn to the page numbered 324, results reported in the Farm Family Exposure Study, are you aware of whether they informed the researchers of the agricultural health study?
They did. I may have mentioned earlier, so one of the things in the Andreotti study, the 2018 update of the agricultural health study, is they looked at these intensity-weighted lifetime days I described. So, you know, making sure you can distinguish between me killing dandelions in my yard or my driveway and someone who's out spraying a cornfield for a good part of the day. It's not just, you would count that sometimes as one day, but intensity allows you to really understand the difference between me and a farmer. And that's what this farm family exposure study allowed, was to give some understanding so you could separate out people and make sure you really were classifying them based on their exposure.
Was part of your job at Monsanto to develop an understanding of what IARC had done and why it had done it?
That is correct.
And was another part of your job to understand what kind of response Monsanto could make to IARC?
That's correct.
Was another part of your job to evaluate how other regulatory bodies around the world viewed what IARC had done?
It was. That was part of my job.
All right, I'm going to hand you what I've marked as Exhibit 99.
All right.
Is Exhibit 99 a business record you prepared based on facts you had researched and developed concerning IARC and the regulatory evaluations of what IARC had done?
It is.
Did you create Exhibit 99 on or about the time that you acquired the facts and knowledge of what IARC had done and the world regulatory responses to it. Did you create it around the same time?
I did.
Was it part of your regular business responsibilities at the time?
Yes, it was.
And did the company rely on it in its regular course of business?
Yes, the company did.
Looking at the first page of the document we've marked as Exhibit 99, you see that you've recorded information about the IARC's rationale for its decision-making.
I do see that.
And you see that there are a number of different categories that you've evaluated.
Yes, I do see that.
One of them is the epidemiological data. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And you said that the IARC had concluded there was limited evidence of glyphosate causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in humans, right?
Yes, that's correct.
What's the meaning of limited in that sentence?
So IARC has various classifications of evidence. One of them is this term limited. And my understanding of that is that they are seeing an association, but chance, bias, and confounding cannot be ruled out.
Did IARC rely on animal studies?
Yes, it did.
How many animal studies did IARC rely on?
4.
How many, we're talking about mouse and rat studies, right?
Mouse and rat.
How many mouse and rat studies were available at the time IARC made its decision in 2015?
There were 14.
Exhibit 100 is a paper authored with the lead author of Helmut Grime, dated 2015, entitled Evaluation of Carcinogenic Potential of the Herbicide Glyphosate, drawing on tumor incidence data from 14 chronic carcinogenicity rodent studies. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Is Exhibit 100 the effort that Monsanto made to put into the public domain and publish all the mouse and rat studies that have been done on glyphosate?
It is the effort that Monsanto made, as well as the glyphosate task force, which is all the companies who have registered glyphosate-based herbicides, or glyphosate itself.
Okay, so and you'd mentioned that in a number of questions that you were asked by Mr. Wisner. The Glyphosate Task Force is it's a group of companies that, and they share data, right?
That's the idea, is that you're able to share data, and this would be an example of what they've done.
And in some cases, some of these mouse studies were not done by Monsanto, but they were done by other companies that have an interest in glyphosate.
Yes, and then these are then submitted. These studies are the ones that are being used, around the world to submit to government agencies for review.
And you'll see on the front page of the Grime article, there's a heading for rat carcinogenicity and a heading for mouse carcinogenicity. Do you see that?
That's correct.
And the studies are numbered 1 through 14.
That's correct.
So those are the 14 studies that IARC should have had access to when it was evaluating the carcinogenic potential of glyphosate.
Yes.
In your analysis of the IARC decision, did you reach an understanding of why they didn't consider the 10 other studies involving mice and rats?
So their statement is that IARC's statement is that they only consider publicly available data, and therefore these are statements they've made outside of the monograph. So they've said, as part of the rules, that we only consider publicly available data. And then in the monograph itself, they said they did not consider these studies because they did not have sufficient information on some of the studies.
Did Monsanto, in addition to publishing or facilitating the publishing of the Grime article, did Monsanto take other steps to try to get these mouse and rat studies to IARC so they could be evaluated?
We did.
And this was before they reached their decision?
Yes, this is before they met. IARC has data deadlines for each of their meetings, and so we had to provide this publication to them prior to that data deadline. And Dr. Donna Farmer was responsible for sharing this with them. She initially, I'm sorry.
When you say this, you're referring to the mouse and rat study?
Yes, sharing the Grime publication with all the mouse and rat studies with IARC. She attempted to email this document to them, but did not receive a response. She then, in an attempt to make sure they saw it, she used what's called an electronic file transfer service. And the idea is you have to click on a web link, and that opens up the document for you, and the sender gets a receipt, so we would know they had opened it. We did not get a receipt saying they had opened it, so we did not know that they had. And at that point, Dr. Farmer, my understanding is she saved it onto a thumb drive and then sent it to IARC's offices via FedEx. And there was signature required, so when they signed for the delivery, we knew they had it.
Now, of the 4 studies that IARC decided to consider, did you evaluate how other bodies, regulatory bodies, had seen those same exact studies?
I have, that is correct.
Is there a difference in the type of data that IARC considered and the type of data that regulatory bodies considered, apart from the 4 mouse and rat studies we just discussed?
Yes, there were other differences. So if we look at, we call it mechanistic data. Earlier we used the term cell data. You have data in the open literature, that's been conducted, say, as part of a research laboratory at a university. You also have data that's been generated by a company like Monsanto or other companies, where we're looking at this question of, can glyphosate or glyphosate-based herbicides damage genetic material in a way that could indicate cancer?
Are the studies that are done for regulatory bodies required to abide by international protocols?
They are.
What are those protocols?
So this is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and I alluded to this earlier, where these are internationally accepted guidelines, where many countries around the world have agreed this is how we want the study done, so we can interpret the data, so we can make sure everyone is using the same rule book, so we can interpret the data when we have them.
Are there other standards that are required for regulatory submissions?
Yes. Also, the other thing is, along with that, is good laboratory practices. And I mentioned earlier, we have to be able to track the data, audit the data, know where the data are being kept. But then also, you want to make sure that the results of these studies, these cellular studies, the mechanistic studies that are telling us about the potential to damage DNA, are relevant to a human health risk assessment. That's really what, when you're looking at a human health risk assessment, agencies require that they be informative of that, so they can be used in that risk assessment.
And you remember that Mr. Wisner showed you Exhibit 74, and got you to say that part of the, well, he thought you said that part of the EPA agreed with IARC instead of the other parts of the EPA. Remember that?
I did not say that.
He was talking about the Office for Research and Development, ORD.
I recall that part of the conversation.
And he claimed that you said that the ORD agreed with IARC and that the Office of Pesticide Programs did not agree with IARC.
I recall that part of the conversation.
Is that what you meant to say?
No, that is not.
Okay. So if the question that Mr. Wisner was trying to answer with Exhibit 10, what we marked as Exhibit 101, what he had marked as 73, is whether these entities had reached a conclusion that IARC was right about glyphosate, then that's not supported for the ORD, right?
That is correct.
And so we would just cross that out, because that's not what you said to Mr. Wisner. It's just something he wrote on the exhibit.
That's correct.
So now I want to go through your analysis of the world regulatory bodies.
Okay.
Also included in the business record we've marked as Exhibit 99. Did you make an effort at the time you prepared Exhibit 99 to understand the regulatory conclusions of various entities that had evaluated glyphosate after the IARC decision?
Yes, I did.
Are those listed in Exhibit 99?
Yes, they are.
Let's turn to the first one you reported on, the European Food Safety Authority. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What's the European Food Safety Authority?
This is the regulatory body within Europe that has responsibility for making final determinations about the safety of pesticides across the European Union.
What analysis did the European Food Safety Authority make of glyphosate after the IARC decision?
They concluded that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a carcinogenic risk to humans.
Let's turn to the next page. You see you've reported on the Canadian Pest Management Regulatory Agency.
I do see that.
Is that the roughly the Canadian equivalent of the EPA?
In many ways, yes.
And did you make an effort to understand what the Canadian Pest Management Regulatory Agency thought about the potential of glyphosate to cause cancer even after IARC had reached its conclusions?
I did.
What did the Canadian Pest Management Regulatory Agency conclude?
They also concluded that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a human cancer risk.
Turn to the next page. You see that you've reported on the Japan Food Safety Commission.
I do see that.
Did you make an effort to understand where the Japan Food Safety Commission had come out on the safety of glyphosate even after the IARC decision?
I did.
What did the Japan Food Safety Commission conclude?
They looked across a range of endpoints, and so their key statement was no neurotoxicity, no toxicity to the nervous system, carcinogenicity, won't cause cancer, reproductive effects, teratogenicity, that's developmental toxicity, or genotoxicity was observed. So this is consistent with what we were seeing out of Europe and Canada.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. Is there something called the JMPR?
Yes, this is part of the World Health Organization. So it's the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Health Organization. And they put these two groups together to assess the risks of pesticide residues on food.
Is the JMPR part of the World Health Organization?
That's correct.
And that's the same organization that IARC's part of?
That's correct.
Did the JMPR agree with IARC?
No, they did not.
What did the JMPR conclude?
Glyphosate is unlikely to pose a carcinogenic risk to humans from exposure through the diet.
Let's turn to the next one. European Chemicals Agency. Do you see that?
I do see that.
What's the European Chemicals Agency?
So that stands, so they're abbreviated ECHA, is the way people refer to them, ECHA. And their job is to standardize hazard warnings across Europe so that all members of the European Union are looking at chemical hazards the same way. They have a labeling and warning system that they rely on. And that's what ECHA's job is, to develop the warning and enforce it.
And had ECHA reviewed the safety of glyphosate after the IARC decision?
ECHA did review that. This is a panel of independent scientists they bring together for this review.
Did ECHA agree with IARC about the carcinogenic potential of glyphosate?
They did not. ECHA's conclusion was there was no hazard classification no hazard classification for carcinogenicity is warranted for glyphosate according to the it's CLP criteria, but that stands for it's essentially their rules about how do we label products.
All right, let's turn to the next one. New Zealand. Did New Zealand's Environmental Protection Authority evaluate the safety after the IARC decision concerning glyphosate?
New Zealand did.
And New Zealand didn't agree with IARC either, did they?
They did not. They concluded glyphosate is unlikely to be genotoxic or carcinogenic.
Let's turn to the very last page. I'm going to skip over one for a second. We'll come back to it. The Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. Do you see that?
I do see that.
Is that the entity in Australia that evaluates risks from things like glyphosate?
Yes, they are the agency that regulates pesticides, including glyphosate.
Did you make an effort to understand how the Australian regulatory body had considered the safety of glyphosate.
I did, and what they were doing is they were asked to please take a look at glyphosate again following IR, and determine do we need to go through this whole analysis again, or do the data we have support the conclusions that we've already adopted.
And were they able to answer that question?
They were.
And did they answer it in a way that agreed with IARC?
No, they did not. They said Australia concluded exposure to glyphosate does not pose a carcinogenic risk to humans.
Okay, so we've looked at all these regulatory bodies that have not agreed with IARC.
That's correct.
Let's go to the one second to the last page. You see that that's the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
I do see that.
And the EPA is the entity that's responsible for evaluating the safety of compounds like glyphosate and Roundup.
That's correct.
Did the EPA evaluate the safety of glyphosate after the IARC decision?
It did.
And we talked about that. Is that the OPP evaluation?
That's correct.
And what did the EPA agree or disagree with IARC?
They disagreed.
What did they conclude?
So the United States EPA classified glyphosate as not likely to be carcinogenic to humans.
You mentioned that there had been some work done to fix some of the problems that Aquavello observed, and that were reported in Exhibit 20 is 1997 concerns regarding the unreliability of the AHS. Do you recall that?
I do recall that.
And there was something that was done with respect to making the questionnaire data better. Is that correct?
It wasn't about the questionnaire itself. It was the protocol for administering it. They wanted to understand how reliable it was across time.
They couldn't go back and change the answers to the questionnaires they already had, could they?
No, not to my knowledge.
So you're aware that somewhere around 37% of the participants dropped out?
That's my recollection.
When those people dropped out, of the 37% that were lost to follow-up, the Andreotti team could not get answers to questionnaires from them, could they?
They could not.
You went over Exhibit 74, which was the summary of ORD comments on OPP's glyphosate cancer assessment. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do recall that.
Can you pull that up?
Yes.
And you focused in on their defining the limited evidence by IARC. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Relative to epidemiology.
I do recall that.
Was that the only arm of scientific inquiry that ORD relied upon, or these scientists relied upon for issuing their opinions?
That was part of the information they considered.
But they also considered the toxicology and mechanistic studies as well, correct?
They so what they were doing is looking at the CARC report that was being prepared for public release, and so they looked across the CARC report.
And they found a number of discrepancies or things they disagreed with, correct?
They shared some comments, and again, the challenge here is they're saying ORD. The ORD reviewers, they don't identify who those people are in this document, so it's hard to understand. Is this 20? Is it 2? We don't know that.
If the jury were to get the idea that that the ORD had only looked at epidemiology based on your testimony, that would be incorrect.
So, again, with this document, I think the important part is to be able, I think only ORD can really speak to who were these people. There's no information about who they were and what they were doing.
So on the second page there, the second paragraph, you see where it says OPP and EFSA focus on pairwise comparisons.
I do see that.
Which were generally not significant, while IARC also uses trend tests, which yielded several significant results. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And in a few cases, OPP reported trend test results that differed from those of IARC, but did not report which tests they used. EPA's cancer guidelines state that trend tests and pairwise comparison tests are the recommended tests for determining whether chance rather than a treatment-related effect is a plausible explanation for an apparent increase in tumor incidence. Significance in either kind of test is sufficient to reject the hypothesis that chance accounts for the result. Do you see that?
I do see those words.
Well, isn't this pointing out that there, amongst other methodologies applied by the EPA, were departures from the EPA guidelines for analyzing animal studies?
They were, so as I read this comment, what they're saying is, we have the cancer guidelines state, and they have information about how to do statistical analyses of these studies. The white paper that EPA is now using reflects that. And so this is essentially a comment on a report that is no longer the primary line of evidence for EPA.
Well, what I think I'm trying to get at, I think, is that it seems like if you have the opportunity, or Monsanto has the opportunity, to read an analysis in a way that shows there's no risk, they'll find that. And if there is a way of reading where there is a risk, they'll ignore it. Is that their protocol?
That is not our protocol.
And doesn't it seem like that's what they're doing, though?
No, it does not.
So IARC did not just rely on epidemiology, right?
That is correct.
And they didn't rely just on toxicology, right?
They relied on animal studies and epidemiology to reach their conclusion.
And so you're disregarding this statement here that says there is strong evidence that exposure to glyphosate or glyphosate-based formulations is genotoxic based on studies in humans, in vitro, and studies in experimental animals. One study in several communities in individuals exposed to glyphosate-based formulations also found chromosomal damage in blood cells. In this study, markers of chromosomal damage, micronucleus formation, were significantly greater after exposure than before exposure in the same individuals. There is strong evidence that glyphosate-based formulations, and AMPA can act to induce oxidative stress based on studies in experimental animals and in studies in humans in vitro.
That supports their classification, but they do not say their classification is based on that.
So in making this overall evaluation, the working group noted that the mechanistic and other relevant data support the classification of glyphosate in Group 2A. That's pretty clearly states that there is support in the mechanistic data and toxicological data for the 2A finding, correct?
What they're saying is that the mechanistic data, as they interpret it, supported their conclusion of a 2A classification using human epidemiology data and animal data. I'm not trying to say that it wasn't, all I'm saying is they made the classification and then they noted the mechanistic data were supportive of their decision.